You're beautiful when you're not trying so hard to disappear. Elena Moretti heard those words and felt something crack open inside her chest. Something she had kept sealed for so long she'd forgotten it existed. No one had ever said that to her, not once in 24 years. And the man who said it was smiling at her like she was the only person standing in a room full of 200 people. She didn't know that 40 seconds later, the doors would open and a man would walk in who would make every single one of those 200 people stop breathing. And he would be looking directly at her. If this story already has your heart subscribed to our channel, hit that notification bell and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The restaurant was called Piccolo Roma, and it smelled like garlic and old wood and the kind of honest cooking that nobody in this part of Manhattan paid attention to anymore. Elena Moretti had worked there for 3 years. 3 years of carrying plates that were heavier than her arms could comfortably hold. 3 years of smiling at people who talked over her, around her, through her, as if the woman bringing their food was simply part of the furniture. 3 years of going home after the last table cleared, sitting on the edge of her bed in her apartment that was barely large enough to turn around and counting what she had left after she sent the monthly payment to the man her father had owed money to before he disappeared from her life entirely. She had learned to be invisible because invisible was safe. Invisible meant nobody expected anything from you. Invisible meant nobody could hurt you. She was good at it. Frighteningly good. She wore her dark hair pulled back so tightly it gave her a headache by noon. She wore the required black uniform 1 size larger than she needed because smaller sizes attracted comments she didn't want. She kept her eyes down when she walked and her voice low when she spoke, and her answers short when anyone asked her anything. Elena? That was her supervisor, Ray, snapping his fingers from across the dining room, the way he always did, like she was a dog that had wandered off. Private event tonight, back room. Full setup by 6. Yes, sir. And don't drop anything this time. She hadn't dropped anything in 11 months. But Ray remembered the one time she had, and he was the kind of man who collected other people's worst moments the way others collected trophies. Elena nodded and went to work. The private event was for a group of businessmen, the kind of men who wore watches that cost more than Elena's annual salary and spoke about money the way other people spoke about weather. Something ordinary. Something that simply existed. There were 22 of them. Elena counted because counting was something she did when she was nervous, and she was always nervous at private events. Private events meant the guests felt more entitled than usual. No other diners to observe them. No public expectations to maintain. She moved through the room with quiet efficiency, refilling glasses before they were empty, removing plates before they grew cold, making herself as small and unobtrusive as possible. The men talked loudly about acquisitions and percentages and a deal in Singapore that had apparently gone sideways in a way that was somebody else's fault. Not one of them looked at her. That was the point. That was the goal. Elena had trained herself to achieve exactly this. But then, one of them did. He was younger than the others, late 20s, maybe 30, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he hadn't bothered to fix it before arriving. He wore his suit jacket, open tie, loosened, which immediately marked him as different from the starched rigidity of every other man at the table. He wasn't speaking when Elena first noticed him noticing her. He was listening, actually listening to the man beside him, and there was something in his expression that was carefully, deliberately attentive in a room full of people performing attention without actually giving it. His name tag identified him as Valenti A. She didn't look at it long enough to read the first name. Elena moved around the table, refilling water glasses from her right side, and when she reached him, she was careful not to catch his eye. Standard practice. Look at the glass. Pour. Move on. Thank you, he said. She nearly knocked over the pitcher. Nobody said thank you at these events. It wasn't that they were deliberately rude, it simply didn't occur to them. The water appeared. The water was replenished. Water did not require gratitude. Of course, Elena said, her voice coming out quieter than she intended. Do you do these events often? He asked, and his voice was conversational, easy, like they were two people in a hallway rather than a waitress and a guest in the middle of a formal dinner. Often enough, she said. Do they tip well? She looked at him then. She couldn't help it. The question was so unexpected, not intrusive, not inappropriate, just startlingly direct, that her eyes came up before her caution could stop them. He was looking at her with genuine curiosity, not the assessing kind that men sometimes aimed at her with undercurrents she didn't like, just actual simple curiosity, like he actually wanted to know the answer. Not usually, she said honestly before she could think better of it. He made a small sound that might have been a laugh and turned back to his conversation. Elena moved on. It happened at the worst possible moment, which was the only kind of moment things like this ever happened. She was carrying a tray of wine glasses, 6 of them, full heavy, back from the service station, toward the main table, when the hem of her uniform caught on the edge of a chair leg that had been pushed back at an angle. She felt the shift before she could prevent it. The tray tilted. Her hand tried to correct. 2 glasses slid. The sound they made when they hit the marble floor was the loudest thing she had heard in years. The room went silent. 22 wealthy men turned to look at the woman crouching on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and spreading red wine, and the silence was worse than anything they could have said. The silence was judgment without even bothering to verbalize itself. Ray appeared from nowhere, the way he always did when things went wrong, his face already arranged in the expression of a man calculating how much this was going to cost him. Elena, I'm sorry. She was already moving, already pulling the clean cloth from her apron, already pressing it to the floor. I'm so sorry, I'll clean this up immediately. You know, said a voice from directly beside her, and she looked up to find the young man, Valenti, crouching down beside her, completely unconcerned about his expensive suit trousers making contact with wine-soaked floor. You know you're beautiful when you're not trying so hard to disappear. She stared at him. He was not looking at her the way men looked at women they were trying to impress. He was looking at her the way a person looks at something they've been watching for a while and have only now decided to name. She started. Here. He took the cloth from her hand and pressed it against the largest puddle himself, as casually as if this were something he did every day. Take the glass. I've got this. Ray stood frozen, clearly uncertain whether to be angry at Elena or grateful to the guest. Around the room, the other men were already turning back to their conversations, already moving on, already forgetting. But she would not forget. She would not forget the way he said those words, without calculation, without expectation, without any apparent awareness that they were the most significant words anyone had spoken to her in years. You're beautiful when you're not trying so hard to disappear. She was still thinking about them 20 minutes later when the doors to the private room opened. The change happened in the air first. Elena felt it before she saw the cause of it. A drop in the temperature of the room, not literal, but real. The way conversation shrank. The way posture straightened. The way Ray, who had been standing at the back with his phone out, suddenly put his phone into his pocket and stood up straighter. 22 powerful businessmen behaved differently in the space of 3 seconds. She turned to see who had walked in. He was tall, not excessively, but with the kind of height that presence made larger. Dark suit, no tie, the collar of his shirt open at the throat, in a way that was somehow more formal than the dressed-up men around him rather than less. He had the kind of face that could have been called handsome if you weren't too busy being careful around it. Dark eyes that moved through the room with the complete unhurried confidence of someone who had never needed to rush to assess a situation because situations waited for him. He was perhaps 35, possibly older. Age did something different to men like him, didn't add weakness, only weight. He spoke briefly to a man near the door, something low that Elena couldn't catch, and the man nodded rapidly and stepped back. Then his eyes moved through the room and stopped. Elena realized with a cold clarity that started at the back of her neck and traveled straight down her spine, that they had stopped on her. Not on the table she was standing beside, not on the guest she had just served, not on some point past her shoulder, on her. She looked away immediately. Her heart was doing something it had no business doing. Beside her, the young man Valenti had gone very still. "You know him?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone knows him," Valenti said quietly, and his voice had changed. Not afraid exactly, but careful in a way it hadn't been before. "That's Marco De Luca." The name landed in this room the way a stone lands in still water. De Luca. Elena had heard the name. You heard the name if you lived in this city long enough. You heard it the way you heard about weather systems that destroyed coastlines, as something powerful and distant and real, but not something that had any bearing on your ordinary life. She had never expected to be standing 5 feet from it. She kept her eyes down and moved toward the service station, and told herself that the prickling along the back of her neck was nothing. Coincidence. A man's eyes moving through a room and happening to land on her for a moment before moving on. She was invisible. She'd spent years making herself that way. She told herself she believed it. The thing nobody understood about being invisible is that it only works if everyone participates. Elena had spent years relying on the social contract that said women who made themselves small would be treated as small. It had worked. It had worked consistently and well. Marco De Luca did not participate in social contracts. She was refilling coffee at the far end of the table, her back partially turned to the room, when she became aware that someone was standing near her. Not beside her, not approaching, simply present in the specific way that presence announces itself. She turned. He was 3 feet away, holding a glass of water he had apparently poured himself from the pitcher on the side table, watching her with those dark eyes in a way that was neither aggressive nor warm, but simply utterly completely direct. "You've been working this event for 3 hours, he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "Because what else do you say to that alone? There's another server. He takes the main room." She heard herself providing information she had not intended to provide and made herself stop. "Ray Callahan runs this place. He manages it." "He's an idiot," Marco De Luca said, with the calm certainty of a man stating the temperature. Elena's mouth almost moved toward a smile before she caught it. "I couldn't comment on that," she said carefully. Something shifted in his expression, not a smile exactly, more like the preliminary note that precedes one. "I noticed you earlier," he said, "when the glasses broke. I'm sorry about that. It won't—" "I'm not criticizing it," he said, and his voice had an edge of something that was almost impatience, but directed at her apology rather than at her. "I'm telling you what I noticed. The way you moved to fix it before anyone could say anything. The way you didn't ask anyone for help." He paused. "The way you thanked Valenti for his, without making him feel like you needed it." Elena stared at him. He said it like these were observations he had been storing and had now decided to deliver. No preamble, no softening, just information offered directly. "I don't know what to do with that," she said honestly. "I know," he said. "That's what makes it interesting." He looked at her for one more moment, and then he turned and walked back to the head of the table where 2 men immediately leaned toward him with the urgent posture of people who had been waiting to speak and had not dared interrupt. Elena stood very still. Her heart was doing the thing again. She told it to stop. It did not stop. The evening ended the way those evenings always did, with the gradual dissolution of the group, the shuffling on of coats, the brief flurries of handshakes and business card exchanges. Elena moved through the room collecting abandoned glasses and folding used napkins, restoring the space to a neutral blankness that erased all evidence of the people who had filled it. Adrian Valenti found her at the service station. "I didn't introduce myself properly earlier," he said, extending his hand. "Adrian, Valenti Development." "Elena," she said, shaking it. "Moretti, Piccola Roma." She gestured at the room with a small self-deprecating motion. He smiled. He had an easy smile, the kind that arrived quickly and looked genuine, because it probably was. You handled tonight with a lot of grace. I dropped 2 glasses and spilled half a bottle of red wine on an imported marble floor, and you recovered without making anyone else feel responsible for it. In my world, that's called leadership." She looked at him skeptically. "In your world, real estate development, where everything goes wrong eventually, and the only question is how the person in charge responds to it." He tilted his head slightly. "You responded well." "I was nervous," she said. "I know. That's what made it impressive." He paused. "Can I ask, are you always working events like this, or do you have other—" "Just this," she said. "And the main restaurant." Something moved through his expression, not pity, which she would have shut down immediately, but something more like consideration. "I run a lot of client events. We always need reliable staff. Someone who reads a room well." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card. "If you're ever looking for additional work, the pay is significantly better than this." She took the card. The paper was heavy matte finish, the printing precise, the kind of card that cost money to print because the person giving it had money to spend. "Thank you," she said, and meant it the way she had meant almost nothing in a very long time. "Thank you," he said, "for not disappearing into the wallpaper. It was a pleasure to actually see you tonight." He walked out. Elena stood holding his card and thought, 2 people said something real to me tonight. 2 different people, in the same room, in the same 3 hours. That had never happened before. She put the card in the pocket of her uniform and went back to collecting glasses. She did not notice Marco DeLuca pause at the door. She did not notice him turn back to look at her one more time, the way a man looks at something he intends to understand better. She did not notice the way his eyes moved from her to the door through which Adrian had just exited, and then back to her, and stayed there for a moment. That meant something she wouldn't understand for weeks. She was too busy being invisible. The walk home from Piccola Roma took 11 minutes, which Elena knew exactly because she had timed it on her first week and had never bothered to vary the route since. Familiar was efficient. Efficient saved energy. Energy was a finite resource when you worked the hours she worked. The city was loud around her. It was always loud, always moving, always happening in ways that had nothing to do with her, and she moved through it with her head slightly down and her keys between her fingers, the way her mother had taught her when she was 16. Her mother. She didn't let herself think about her mother on walking home nights, because it always made the 11 minutes feel like 11 years, and she needed to sleep when she got home, not lie awake with her chest caving in. Her mother had died 3 years ago, leaving behind a hospital bill large enough to be genuinely paralyzing, and a set of debts that Elena had spent those same 3 years untangling. The debts belonged mostly to her father, who had borrowed money from people who were not patient, and then chosen to solve that problem by simply leaving the city and leaving his family behind him. The man he owed money to was named Sal Conti, and Sal Conti had explained very patiently to Elena 3 days after her mother's funeral that while he had always respected her mother, the money was owed, and the person currently responsible for the Moretti name was Elena. She had paid him $300 a month since then. At that rate, she would be free in 4 years. 4 years felt like a foreign country she might not live long enough to visit. She was thinking about this the way she always thought about it on these walks, like pressing on a bruise to confirm it still hurt when the black car pulled up beside her. She stopped walking. Her keys tightened between her fingers. The window came down, and the man behind it was not one she recognized. He was broad and still, with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people paid to notice things. "Miss Moretti," he said. "Mr. DeLuca would like a word." Her first instinct was to say no. Her second instinct was to say no more loudly. Her third instinct was to look at the car, a black SUV, large, the windows behind the driver tinted to opacity, and understand that she was standing on a street at 10:30 at night with her keys between her fingers, and that the man behind the wheel had just correctly used her last name without having heard it from anyone at the event, because she had not been introduced to Marco DeLuca, which meant he already knew who she was, which meant saying no was probably not the option it appeared to be. "I'd prefer to walk," she said, because she wanted to establish immediately that she was a person with preferences. "Of course," the man said. "Mr. DeLuca is also walking." She turned. Marco DeLuca was standing 15 feet behind her on the same sidewalk, hands in the pockets of his suit jacket, watching her with that same quality of unhurried directness she'd encountered at the event, as if he had all the time available and was choosing to spend some of it here with her for reasons she had not yet been given. The car moved on ahead and parked. "You walked out a back entrance," she said, because she hadn't seen him leave the building. "Yes," he said simply. "Why?" "Because I wanted to speak with you without the event as a backdrop." She studied him in the streetlight. He was easier to read out here, or maybe just less amplified by the room he'd walked into. He was still the most significant-looking person on the street, but out here there was nothing around him that had rearranged itself in his presence, so the weight of him was less immediately disorienting. "How do you know my name?" she asked. "I asked." "Who did you ask?" "Ray Callahan." "He wouldn't have told you." A very small pause. "He would tell me." Elena absorbed this and filed it under things that confirm what I already suspected about who this man is. "What do you want to speak to me about?" she said. He turned and began walking in the same direction she'd been heading, which was either coincidence or the result of knowing her route, and she was not ready to determine which. She fell into step beside him because the alternative was standing on the sidewalk alone, watching him walk away, which felt worse. "You have a debt," he said, "with Sal Conti." She stopped walking. He took 2 steps before he noticed she'd stopped and turned back to face her. "How do you know about that?" she said, and her voice was flat because the flatness was the only thing between her and something she was not going to display on a public street in front of a stranger. "I know about most things in this city that involve Sal Conti," he said. "He's been taking money from people who can't afford to give it for 30 years. He's particularly systematic about it." He paused. "He came to see you 3 days after your mother died." Her chest was tight. "That's not information I should have," he finished. "I know. I'm not apologizing for having it. I'm explaining why I wanted to speak with you." "Why?" He looked at her steadily. "Because I intend to remove Conti's claim on you." Silence. She heard the city around them, a cab honking 2 blocks over, the distant sound of music from a window somewhere above, and underneath all of it, the very loud sound of her own pulse. "Why would you do that?" she said. "Because it shouldn't exist," he said. "Your father borrowed money and left. The debt followed his name, not yours. Conti applied it to you because you were accessible and because he could." His jaw tightened by a fraction. "That's not a debt. That's extortion." "That may be true," she said carefully, "but it doesn't explain why you'd involve yourself." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. Not entirely." He pulled a card from his jacket, a plain white card with a single phone number, no name, and held it out to her. "Think about what I've told you. If you decide you want to talk about it further, use that." She looked at the card. She looked at him. "I already have a card tonight," she said. Something flickered in his expression. "From Valenti." It wasn't a question. She answered it anyway. "Yes, he's a good man," Marco said, and something in the way he said it was neither warm nor cold, but simply accurate, the way you describe a fact about the weather. "Honorable. Consistent." He held the card toward her a moment longer. "2 very different options, Miss Moretti." She took the card. She didn't know why. She put it in the opposite pocket from Adrian's. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said, and he stood on the sidewalk and watched her walk away, and she felt it, that quality of attention, all 11 minutes home. She sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment, and she pulled out both cards. Adrian Valenti's was cream-colored, precisely printed, the corner of it slightly bent from the pocket. A legitimate man with a legitimate business and easy warmth, and the kind of smile that meant he had never been required to learn a careful one. Marco DeLuca's was plain white, a single phone number, no name necessary. A man who operated in the space between what was legal and what was real, with dark eyes that saw too much and a voice that offered things he had no reason to offer. She set them on the nightstand, side by side. She told herself she would think about it in the morning. She lay awake until 3 in the morning, not thinking about the cards, thinking about what it meant that two different men had looked at her, genuinely looked at her on the same night after 3 years of careful invisibility. Thinking about what it meant that the one who had terrified her more was also the one who had known about Sal Conti, about her father, about 3 days after her mother's funeral. Thinking about what it meant that he hadn't used that information to threaten her. He'd used it to explain himself. She didn't know what to do with a powerful man who explained himself. She wasn't sure anyone did. The next morning, she went to work. Ray didn't mention the broken glasses. He also didn't mention Marco DeLuca, which was so profoundly out of character that it told her everything she needed to know about what that conversation had contained. She worked the lunch shift. She smiled at the people who needed smiling at. She refilled the breadbasket without being asked, because she always refilled the breadbasket without being asked. And she kept her eyes moving through the room, the way she always did, cataloging who needed what, before they knew they needed it. At 2:15, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. I spoke with Conti this morning. His claim on you has been settled. You'll receive confirmation in writing within the week. M.D. She read it 3 times. Then she sat down in the empty chair at table 12, which she was absolutely not supposed to do during her shift, and she put her phone face down on her leg and stared at the wall and tried to locate a framework for understanding what had just happened. 4 years. 4 years of $300 a month, which was money she didn't have, but scraped together and delivered without complaint, because the alternative was worse. Gone. Settled. By a man who had spoken to her for approximately 11 minutes, who had no relationship to her, who had no reason, no stated reason, no reason she could identify for doing it. She picked up her phone. She opened the message. She typed why she stared at it. She sent it. 3 minutes passed. Then, because you were worth more than what he was taking from you. Her throat closed. She thought about the young man at the event, Adrian, who had said without knowing how true it was that she was beautiful when she wasn't trying to disappear. And she thought about the other man who had apparently spent a morning making a problem disappear that she had been carrying for 3 years. 2 men. 2 completely different ways of seeing her. And she, who had spent years making herself small enough to be ignored, suddenly taking up more space than she knew how to manage. She put the phone in her apron pocket. She stood up from table 12. She went back to work. She did not allow herself to cry until after the shift ended, and even then she couldn't have said with any certainty exactly which part she was crying about. The confirmation letter arrived on a Thursday. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address, and inside was a single sheet of paper that stated in the dry language of legal settlement that the debt previously held under the name Moretti, originating from obligations incurred by 1. Dominic Moretti, transferred without legal basis to Elena Moretti, had been satisfied in full. Attached was a stamped release document bearing Sal Conti's signature. Elena read it standing at her kitchen counter, still wearing her coat. She read it again. Then she folded it carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and put the envelope inside the fireproof box under her bed, where she kept her mother's death certificate and her own birth certificate and the lease agreement for this apartment, all the documents that proved she existed and had the right to keep existing. She lay on top of her bed, fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. She had expected to feel relief. Pure, clean, uncomplicated relief, the way you feel when a stone you've been carrying finally leaves your hand. Instead, she felt something more complicated than that. Something that had relief in it, yes, but also something that sat uneasily beside the relief, like a second stone she hadn't noticed until the first one was gone. She owed Marco DeLuca something now. She didn't know what. She didn't know how much. She didn't know if he would ever name a price, or whether the price was the kind of thing that announced itself only when it was already too late to negotiate. She knew very little about how men like Marco DeLuca operated. She knew enough to know that nothing was ever simply given. She picked up her phone and opened the message thread. The letter came. She typed, then deleted it, then typed it again, then added, "Thank you doesn't feel like enough. But I don't know what else to say." She sent it before she could edit it into something more careful. The response came in under 2 minutes. "You don't owe me gratitude. You don't owe me anything." She stared at that. Then why she typed? "I told you why. You told me it shouldn't exist. That's a reason to be angry about it. It's not a reason to pay it." A longer pause this time. 40 seconds. She counted. "Come have coffee with me tomorrow morning. I'll explain better in person." Her thumb hovered over the screen. Every sensible part of her brain, the part that had survived 3 years alone, the part that had learned to measure situations for cost before committing to them, said no. Said that Marco De Luca was not a man you had coffee with. Said that the smarter, safer, more rational choice was to say, "Thank you very much," and use the 4 years of freed-up money to rebuild her life quietly and never think about him again. She typed, "Where?" Bug. The coffee shop he named was not what she expected. She had prepared herself for somewhere expensive and deliberate, the kind of place that was a performance of power dressed up as a restaurant. What she found instead was a small, slightly worn neighborhood place on the east side that had clearly been there since before the neighborhood became valuable. Mismatched chairs. A counter with a crack in the laminate that nobody had bothered to repair. The smell of coffee so familiar it had almost become the smell of the walls themselves. Marco was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table away from the window, a ceramic mug in front of him, and no phone visible. He stood when he saw her. A small gesture automatic. The kind of thing you either had ingrained or you didn't, and waited until she sat before he sat back down. A woman behind the counter called out, "Same as him!" Elena looked at Marco. "What is it? Black? Strong? No particular nobility to it." "That's fine," she told the woman. Marco watched her settle into the chair. He had the same quality she'd noticed at the restaurant event, that complete stillness, the sense that his attention was entirely present in the room rather than distributed across a dozen other concerns. "You're nervous," he said. "I'm cautious," she corrected. "What's the difference?" "Nervous means I think something is wrong. Cautious means I haven't decided yet." Something shifted in his expression, that note before a smile thing she'd seen before. "That's a useful distinction." "I've had to develop useful distinctions," she said. The woman set her coffee down. It was exactly as advertised, strong and black and honest with no ceremony around it. "You want to know what I expect from you," Marco said, not a question. "Yes." "Nothing." "That's not a real answer. It's the true one." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "I didn't settle Conti's claim because I expect something from you. I settled it because it was wrong and I had the ability to make it right. Those are the only two facts that matter. People with your kind of ability don't use it without a ledger," she said carefully. He looked at her steadily. "What do you know about my kind of ability?" "Enough," she said. "Your name ends conversations. Men who run legitimate businesses don't have names that end conversations." He nodded slowly, not denying it, acknowledging it. "You're right that I operate in spaces that aren't entirely clean," he said. "I won't insult you by pretending otherwise, but having a ledger keeping people in debt to me is not how I operate. It's impractical." He paused. "And it's a particular kind of cruelty I don't have interest in." "Why not?" "It's effective. It's effective the way a cage is effective. It keeps things in place. It doesn't make them want to stay." Elena looked at him. "You're telling me you do things for people without expecting return because it makes them choose to be loyal rather than forced." "I'm telling you, I did one specific thing for one specific person," he said. "Because it was the right thing to do. The question of loyalty doesn't enter into it." "Then why did you want to have coffee with me?" A pause. Genuine this time, not calculated. Because I wanted to see you again, he said simply. And I didn't have a better reason than that to give you. Elena had not expected honesty. She had prepared for strategy, for a conversation that moved like chess where every statement was a piece being positioned for an advantage she'd only recognize once it was too late to counter. She had braced for sophistication she'd have to work to keep up with and charm that was really manipulation wearing a better suit. She had not prepared for a man who said I wanted to see you again with the same directness he'd used to tell her about Conti, as if wanting things and naming them were simply the same uncomplicated action. She picked up her coffee. "Tell me something true about yourself," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "You know things about me that I didn't choose to tell you. That's not a balanced conversation. What do you want to know? Something that costs you something to say." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him decide. "I have not had a conversation like this one in approximately 3 years, he said, where I wasn't managing what I said based on what I needed from the person I was saying it to. That sounds exhausting." "It is," he said, directly, no qualification. "Then why do it?" "Because everything has a cost, and that's one I chose to pay." He looked at her. "Your turn." "My turn. Something that costs you something to say." She thought about it. About what she would have said 2 days ago before the envelope arrived and the 4-year wait lifted. She thought about what it felt like to be asked, genuinely asked, rather than overlooked. "I have been angry for a long time," she said. "At my father, at Conti, at everyone who looked through me and decided I wasn't worth looking at. And I performed not being angry so well that I eventually convinced myself I wasn't." She paused. "I was. I'm still am. A little. That's reasonable." "Is it? I feel like I've been carrying it so long it started to feel unreasonable." "Anger that comes from being wronged isn't unreasonable," he said. "It's accurate. The problem is when it becomes the whole identity instead of just the part of it that knows the difference between what was right and what happened." She looked at him. "That's surprisingly precise," she said. "I've been angry for a long time too," he said. "I've had to figure out what to do with it." She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug and let herself sit in the strange stillness of a conversation that was going somewhere she hadn't expected. "Tell me about your father," she said. He shook his head. "Not today." "Fair." "Tell me about yours," he said. "Not today," she said. And for the first time in what felt like a very long time, she found herself almost smiling across a table at a man who had said the wrong thing in exactly the right way. She did not tell Adrian Valenti about the coffee meeting. She told herself this was because there was nothing to tell. It was coffee. It was conversation. It was a normal interaction between two adults who had a specific reason to speak. She told herself Adrian had no claim on her schedule. They had spoken once. He had given her a card. That was the entirety of it. She told herself these things, and she mostly believed them, and then she called the number on Adrian's card. He picked up on the second ring with a warmth that suggested he'd been expecting to hear from her, or at least hoping to. "Elena Moretti," he said, and she could hear the smile in it. "You offered me additional work," she said. "I did. I'm calling about that, if the offer still stands." "It absolutely does." A brief pause. "Are you free for lunch? I can tell you more about what we do and what we'd need. No pressure, just information." She said yes. Lunch with Adrian was everything coffee with Marco was not. Adrian talked easily with enthusiasm about his development projects. A mixed-use building in Brooklyn, he was particularly proud of a community space in the Bronx that had started as a business decision and become something he genuinely cared about. He asked about her work history with genuine interest and listened to the answers without steering them toward a conclusion he'd already reached. He was warm and uncomplicated and direct in the easy way of someone who had never needed to develop a careful version of directness. "You're good with people," he said at some point, watching her deflect the attention of a passing waiter who was about to interrupt him at a critical point in his story. She had done it without thinking, a small gesture that rerouted the waiter without making him feel dismissed. "I've worked in restaurants a long time," she said. "That's not what that was," he said. "That was instinct. You read people." He leaned forward slightly. "I need someone who can run my client events. Not just serve at them, actually manage them. The room, the flow, the people. Make sure everyone feels appropriately important at the right moments." She looked at him. "That's a significant step from waitressing." "It's what you're already doing," he said. "I just want to pay you for it properly." She thought about Ray Callahan and his habit of collecting her worst moments. She thought about 11 months without dropping a glass and never once being acknowledged for it. "What does the pay look like?" she asked. He named a figure that was almost double what she made between the restaurant and the event work combined. She kept her face still. "I'll think about it," she said. He smiled. "I hope you say yes." She thought, two men, two very different offers, both of them real. She was not accustomed to real. She said yes to Adrian the following Monday. She gave Ray 2 weeks' notice that same afternoon, and the satisfaction of his expression, the rapid recalculation of a man who hadn't expected her to be someone who left, was something she held quietly for the rest of her shift without allowing herself to show it. She started at Valenti Development on a Wednesday in a role that Adrian described as event coordination, but which was functionally closer to making sure everything worked without anyone realizing there was work involved. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. The difference was that here, when she made something work, someone noticed. "How did you redirect the Henderson conversation?" Adrian asked her after her second client event, genuinely puzzled. He was heading straight toward the contract dispute, and then somehow he was talking about his grandkids. "He mentioned his daughter earlier in the evening," she said. "People like to talk about the things they're proud of. If you give them a moment to get there, they'll usually take it." Adrian looked at her for a moment. "You've been watching people a long time." "Most of my life," she said. "It shows." He said it with warmth. In the best way. She was happy there. Genuinely, quietly happy, in a way that felt unfamiliar enough to make her slightly suspicious of it. She was good at the work, and people treated her like someone who was good at it, and she came home at the end of the day, tired in the productive way rather than the depleted way. She told herself this was enough, that this was the life. She kept Marco DeLuca's card in the fireproof box under her bed beside the debt release letter. She had not reached out again, neither had he. She told herself that was the correct resolution to something that had no business being anything more than it was. He called on a Friday evening 6 weeks after their coffee. She almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers had a particular sound. Even though all unknown numbers sounded identical, they never felt identical, and she recognized the quality of this one. "I heard you left the restaurant," he said when she answered. "Are you having me followed?" "No, I was at Piccola Roma last week. Ray mentioned it." A brief pause. "He was not gracious about it." "Ray is never gracious about anything." "You're at Valenti Development now." "Is that a question?" "No," he said. "I know where you are." He said it not as a threat, but as simple confirmation, the way you might confirm you know a route you intend to travel. "Is it working?" She leaned against the wall phone pressed to her ear, the sounds of the city coming through her window, the way they always did. "Yes," she said. "It's working." "Good." He sounded, she searched for the word, satisfied, as if the correct outcome had occurred, and this confirmed his read of the situation. "Adrian's a fair employer." "You know him," she said. "Beyond that event. We've had dealings over the years. Real estate intersects with other things." A pause. "He'll treat you well." "I know that," she said. "I don't need you to confirm it for me." A beat. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry." The apology was so quick and unceremonious that it took her a moment to register it. Not the elaborate kind of apology that was really a performance. Just "you're right," and then "I'm sorry," as if they were sequential facts. "Why are you calling?" she asked. "I wanted to hear your voice," he said, with the same directness he used for everything. and I wanted to ask if you'd have dinner with me." She pressed her lips together. "Marco," she said, and his name in her mouth felt different from how she expected. Not frightening, not comfortable either. Something in between that she didn't have a word for yet. "You don't have to," he said. "I know I don't have to. I know you know I know that. I'm thinking." "Take your time." "I'm going to say something and I need you to hear it clearly," she said. "Go ahead. I'm not someone who doesn't know what you are. I'm not choosing not to know because it's more convenient. I know that Marco DeLuca is not a simple man with a simple life who happens to pay other people's debts out of civic generosity. I know there are things about how you operate that I would find troubling if I understood them fully." A pause. "That's all true. That's all. So I need to know that whatever this is, dinner or conversation, or whatever it becomes or doesn't become, it's not going to put me in a position where knowing you becomes a cost I can't manage." Silence. She waited. "I can't promise you I'm a safe person to know," he said. "That would be dishonest, and I told you I wasn't going to be dishonest with you. But I can promise you that I will never use what I know about you against you, and I will never put you in a position you didn't choose." He paused. "Those are the only guarantees I have. They're real ones." She stood by the window for a long moment. "Saturday," she said. 7 o'clock. I'll send the address." "Send it to this number." "I already have this number," he said with something in his voice that was almost dry. She ended the call. She stood very still for a moment, looking at the city through the window, and she thought about 2 cards on a nightstand and a fireproof box under a bed, and a life that had in the space of 6 weeks become almost unrecognizable from the one she'd been living. She thought about her mother, who had always told her that being careful was important, but being closed was death. She thought about Adrian, who had opened a door with warmth and competence and all the steady reliability of someone who had never needed to be anything other than exactly what he appeared to be. She thought about Marco, who had opened a different kind of door entirely, one that was darker and more uncertain and led somewhere she couldn't see the end of. She didn't know which door to walk through. She went to sleep. She dreamed about her mother's voice. Saturday dinner was at a place that was expensive but not performatively, so the kind of restaurant where the quality was in the food rather than the theater around it. Marco was already there when she arrived, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he operated. He arrived first. He created the conditions, and then he waited in them. He stood when he saw her. Same as the coffee shop. Automatic. She sat across from him, and something about the way the light sat in the room made him look briefly almost like a man without the name that followed him everywhere. "You look different," he said. "Different from what?" "From the restaurant. From the street." He studied her with that quality of attention that still made her slightly breathless. "More settled." "I feel more settled," she said honestly. "The job helps." "Adrian gives you room to operate. Adrian gives me responsibility," she corrected. "Which turns out to be what I needed. Not someone making things easier for me. Someone assuming I could handle the hard version." Marco looked at her for a moment. "He noticed you before I did," he said. "At the event." "He spoke to me first," she said carefully. "I know, I was watching." He said it without apology, just fact. "I was watching him talk to you, and I was watching you decide whether to let him in. And then you dropped the glasses, and he moved before I could, and by the time he'd given you the cloth, I had already decided I was going to make Conti's claim disappear." She stared at him. "That was why?" "Partly." He picked up his menu and set it back down without looking at it. A gesture that said he already knew what he was ordering and had sat with the menu only out of social form. "I'd known about the claim for a while. I'd known about you peripherally the way you know about things happening in the city you have some responsibility toward for longer. But that night, I watched you handle a moment of public humiliation with more dignity than most people I deal with handle negotiations. And I decided I was done leaving it alone. Elena set her own menu down. You knew about me before the event, she said. Not personally, as a file, a name connected to a situation I was aware of. That's... She searched for the word. Intrusive, he supplied. I know. It's the nature of how I operate. It's one of the troubling things you'd find troubling if you understood it fully. He met her eyes. I'm telling you because you asked for honesty, and I'd rather give it to you and have you walk out than withhold it and have you stay on false premises. She did not walk out. She looked at this man across a restaurant table. This man who was too much of everything, too informed and too direct and too quietly powerful, and she felt something shift inside her chest that she was not prepared to name. Tell me about your father, she said. He was quiet for a long moment. My father built the first half of what I run now, he said. Not legally. He was not a legal man. He believed that power was the only language that worked, and he spent his life speaking it fluently and teaching me to do the same. A pause. He died when I was 26. By that point, I had been managing significant parts of his operation for 4 years. Did you choose it? I chose to survive it. In the beginning, that looked the same as choosing it. And now I know the difference. His jaw tightened slightly. I've spent the last several years moving things, shifting, removing the parts that are... He stopped. There are people who depend on the stability of what I control. Legitimate people, employees, families, neighborhoods. It's not something you walk away from cleanly. It's something you transform slowly and hope you live long enough to finish. You're trying to make it legitimate, she said. I'm trying to make it less harmful, he said. Legitimate is a long way off. I don't lie to myself about that. She absorbed this. Why are you telling me this? She asked. You could have told me nothing. I wasn't asking for a full accounting. Because you're going to hear things about me, he said. People are going to tell you things, some of them true, and some of them not. And I want you to have my version before you have theirs. So that when you decide what you think of me, you're deciding about the actual person. She thought about that for a long moment. That's either the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me, she said, or the most sophisticated manipulation I've ever encountered. It can be both, he said. I'm a complicated man. I'm aware. And you're still here. I'm still here, she confirmed. He looked at her with something that was not quite the note before a smile now. Something quieter and less guarded and more real. Tell me about your mother, he said. She had not expected that. The specific choice of it, not her father who was the obvious wound, but her mother who was the deeper one. She looked at this man who knew too much and chose honesty and was trying slowly and imperfectly to become something better than what he'd been made into, and she made a decision she hadn't planned to make. She told him. She told him about a woman who had worked 2 jobs for 20 years to keep an apartment that was too small and a life that was too hard, and a daughter who deserved more than circumstances allowed. She told him about a mother who read to her every night until she was 12, and continued leaving books on her pillow after that wordlessly, the way some people express love through language, and some people express it through objects placed deliberately in someone's path. She told him about a hospital that had sent bill after bill, and a father who had already left, and a woman who died apologizing to her daughter for things that were not her fault. Marco DeLuca listened, not with the managed attention of a man calculating how to respond, with something quieter and more complete than that, with the stillness of someone who was actually receiving what was being given. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. She sounds like someone I would have wanted to know, he said. Elena felt the back of her throat tighten. She was, she said. She made you, he said. Not a compliment exactly. An observation the way he observed most things directly with the precision of someone who saw accurately and reported what he saw. The way you move through difficulty, the way you read people, the way you stay. He paused, searching for the right word. Intact, under pressure. That came from somewhere. It came from her. She was the strongest person I've ever known, Elena said. She's still the strongest person you know, he said. You carry her with you. She did not cry. She had learned not to cry in front of people, particularly people she did not fully know, because tears shifted the dynamic of a conversation in a direction she found difficult to manage. She kept her composure with the practiced efficiency of someone who had a lot of practice. But her hands, which were wrapped around her water glass, were not entirely steady. Marco did not point this out. He simply reached across the table and covered them with his briefly warmly without pressure, and then withdrew his hand and picked up his menu, as if nothing had happened, giving her the privacy of pretending the moment had been small. She understood then that he was someone who paid very careful attention to what people needed, and then provided it without making them ask. She understood then that this was more dangerous than everything else about him. She did not tell Adrian about the dinner. 3 weeks passed. She went to work. She ran Adrian's events with the precise, invisible competence that was becoming her signature. She had dinner with Marco, twice more quiet meals at unremarkable restaurants, conversations that ranged widely across things that had cost them both to say. And she told herself repeatedly and with great conviction that she knew what she was doing. Then she walked into work on a Monday morning to find Adrian waiting for her with an expression that was carefully arranged to look casual and was not. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Okay," she said, setting down her bag. "Marco DeLuca," he said. "Have you been in contact with him?" The air in the room changed. She looked at Adrian, at the careful expression, at the something underneath it, that was not anger but was adjacent to it, and she understood that the moment she had been managing around had arrived. "Yes," she said. He nodded slowly. Just nodded for a moment, processing. "For how long?" "Since the night at Piccola Roma," she said. There was a situation he helped me with. And then we've spoken a few times." "Spoken," Adrian repeated, and there was a weight in the repetition. "Adrian." She said his name directly. "I'm not going to account for my time to you. We don't have that kind of relationship. But I'll tell you this honestly, nothing I've done has affected my work here, and nothing I intend to do will." He looked at her for a moment. "I'm not asking about your work," he said. "I'm asking about you. Because He stopped, then started again. "Elena, Marco DeLuca is not the things that surround him, are not simple things. I have dealt with him professionally, and I respect him in specific ways. But I also know what he carries, and what it costs the people around him." He paused. "I don't want to see you hurt." "I'm not fragile," she said. "I know that," he said immediately. "That's not what I mean. I mean that some costs are real regardless of how strong you are." She looked at this good man, this decent, warm, straightforward man, who had seen her at a restaurant and offered her a card and a better life, and had never once asked for anything in return, and she felt the weight of what she was standing between. "I hear you," she said. "I'm being careful." "Are you?" he asked, and his voice was not unkind, just honest in the way she had always appreciated about him. She thought about Marco's hand over hers at the restaurant table, about the way he had listened to her talk about her mother, about a debt that had disappeared and a door that had been opened, and a man who carried darkness and was trying slowly to move towards something better. "I'm trying to be," she said honestly. Adrian nodded. He picked up his jacket from the chair he had been about to leave when she arrived, she realized, and he paused at the door. "I called her beautiful first," he said quietly. She blinked. He smiled, a small, genuine, slightly rueful version of his easy smile. "That night, in the restaurant, I said it, and I meant it, and I didn't follow it up correctly. I offered you a card and a job, because those felt like the right things to give, and they were. But—" He stopped. "I should have just asked if you'd have coffee sometime." She looked at him. "Adrian," she said. "I know," he said. This isn't a competing claim. I don't have a competing claim. I just wanted you to know." He opened the door. "Be careful with him. Not because you can't handle yourself, because he's worth being careful with." He walked out. Elena stood in the empty office and felt the specific weight of a moment where two realities had existed simultaneously and had now quietly and irrevocably begun to separate. She sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop. She did not allow herself to think about what she was feeling until her lunch break, when she went to the small park 2 blocks from the office and sat on a bench and let herself understand that the life she'd been building was no longer as simple as she had been pretending it was. 2 men. 2 versions of a future. One who had called her beautiful first and had been honest enough just now to admit he'd waited too long to do anything about it. One who had walked through a door and changed the temperature of the room and spent 3 months showing her in quiet and deliberate ways that he saw more in her than she had ever seen in herself. She sat with both of those things. She did not make a decision. She went back to work. And that evening, walking home along the route she had memorized 3 years ago for efficiency, she thought about her mother's voice in the dream she'd had. Being careful is important, but being closed is death. And she thought about what it meant that the path she'd least expected was the one that felt most like being awake. Her phone rang before she reached her door. An unknown number. Not Marco's, she knew his number now. This was different. She almost didn't answer. She did. "Miss Moretti?" said a man's voice she didn't recognize, low and deliberate. "You don't know me, but I know a great deal about you, and I think it would be in your interest to hear what I have to say about the company you've been keeping." She stopped walking. "Who is this?" she said. "A friend," the voice said. "One you'll wish you'd made before you got closer to Marco DeLuca than it's wise to get." Her heart was moving fast again. "What do you want?" she said. "Just a conversation," the man said. "And perhaps to give you a chance to walk away from something before it becomes too expensive to leave." The city moved around her, loud, constant, indifferent, and Elena Moretti stood very still in the middle of it, and understood that the life she had thought was becoming simpler had just become something else entirely. She did not go to meet the man on the phone. That was her first decision made, standing on the sidewalk with her heart beating too fast, and the city noise pressing in from every direction. She did not say yes. She did not say she'd think about it. She said very quietly and very clearly, "I'm not interested in conversations with people who introduce themselves as friends without giving me their name." And she ended the call. Then she stood there for another 30 seconds breathing. Then she called Marco. He picked up on the first ring, which she was beginning to understand was something he did for very few people, and his voice when he answered had the particular quality of someone who had already been paying attention before the call arrived. "Elena." "Someone just called me," she said. "A man. He didn't give his name. He said he knew about the company I've been keeping and that I should walk away before it gets expensive." Silence. The quality of silence from Marco DeLuca was different from other silences. It was not empty. It was dense, packed with the sounds of a man processing information with his entire mind, rather than just the surface of it. "Where are you right now?" he said. "Half a block from my apartment." "Go inside. Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone until I call you back. Marco." "Elena." His voice was steady, not hard, not frightened, but absolutely certain, in the way of someone who has assessed a situation and knows exactly what it requires. "Please, 10 minutes. She went inside. She locked the door. She stood in her kitchen and counted the seconds in a way she hadn't done since childhood, when counting had been the thing that kept fear at a manageable size. He called back in 8 minutes. "You're all right," he said when she answered. It was not a question. It was a confirmation, like he needed to hear it directly. "I'm fine," she said. "Tell me what's happening." "There is a man named Victor Reyes," Marco said. "He has been trying to destabilize my operation for approximately 18 months. He's reached the point where attacking me directly has not produced the results he wanted, so he's looking for leverage." A pause. "I didn't think he knew about you. I was wrong about that. I'm sorry." "Who is he?" "He runs a distribution network on the east side. He's been trying to absorb territory that I've been systematically reducing for the past 2 years, the legitimate transition I told you about. The less of it that operates the way it used to, the more he can move into the space. His voice tightened by a fraction. He's not a patient man, and he's running out of options. Calling you is what that looks like. Elena put her back against the kitchen wall. He's going to come at me, she said. Not a question. I don't know yet what he intends, Marco said. What I know is that I should have seen this possibility earlier, and I didn't. That's on me. I'm not going to argue about who it's on, she said. I need to know what I'm dealing with. He paused. You should know that you can walk away from this, completely. I can make you invisible to him in a way that's real and permanent. You cut contact with me. You continue your life. He has no use for you. She felt something in her chest tighten. Is that what you want? She said. What I want and what's safe for you aren't the same question. Answer the question, Marco. A longer pause. No, he said, quietly. It's not what I want. Then tell me what I need to know, she said. All of it. Not the managed version, the real one. He told her. It took 40 minutes, and she sat on her kitchen floor for most of it, because standing felt like it was requiring more physical maintenance than she had available, and the floor was solid and real and exactly as hard as it appeared to be, which was more than she could say for most things at the moment. Victor Reyes was not a man who bluffed. He was a man who escalated. The phone call was an opening move, an assessment of whether she was someone who could be frightened off easily, or someone who required a different approach. The fact that she'd hung up was information he had now, and the information said, not easily frightened. Marco explained this with the same flat directness he used for everything, which she was simultaneously grateful for and deeply unsettled by, because directness about things like this had a weight that softened language was specifically designed to absorb. He'll try again, she said when Marco finished. Yes. With something more significant. Probably. She pressed the back of her head against the wall. And your current approach to this situation is what exactly? I have people watching your building as of 14 minutes ago, he said. I have people tracing the number that called you, and I am rearranging some things in how I intend to deal with Reyes with a different timeline than I'd planned. Rearranging how? Faster, he said, and less patient. She absorbed this. I need to see you, she said. I'll come to you. Not here. Somewhere I chose. I need that right now. She thought for a moment. The coffee shop. An hour. I'll be there, he said. He was already there when she arrived, which she expected. What she did not expect was that he looked different, not in any way she could have pointed to specifically. He was wearing the same kind of clothes, had the same quality of stillness, occupied space, with the same particular authority. But something in his face when he saw her come through the door was less managed than usual. The notes were showing. He stood. He watched her cross the room. And when she sat down across from him, the first thing he said was not tactical or informational. I should have protected you from this before it started, he said. I told you I wouldn't put you in positions you didn't choose. This is a position you didn't choose. Stop, she said. He stopped. I'm not here for an apology. I'm here because I need to understand this situation completely, and you're the person who can give me that understanding. She wrapped her hands around the coffee the woman behind the counter had already set in front of her. He had ordered for her, black and strong. She registered this and filed it under the category of things she would think about later. Tell me about Reyes. Not what you told me on the phone, what you know about how he thinks. Marco looked at her for a moment, with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that appeared when she surprised him, which was apparently not something that happened to him often. He's transactional, he said. He doesn't have ideology, he has acquisitions. Everything is a resource to him. People, relationships, information. He doesn't hate me. He wants what I have, and he's willing to use whatever leverage becomes available. He paused. Using you against me tells me he's assessed you as significant. He doesn't waste moves. Significant meaning what? Marco met her eyes. Meaning, he's figured out that you matter to me, he said. Direct. No qualification. And that's a different kind of leverage than money or territory. The air between them settled into something neither of them moved to disturb for a moment. "How long has he known about me?" she said. "I don't know yet. My people are working on that." "Your best guess," he considered. "The dinner 6 weeks ago. There's a particular restaurant where I've never taken anyone in a personal capacity. If he had a reason to watch it, that's when it became clear. 6 weeks. He'd had 6 weeks of information and had been waiting for the right moment to use it. "He's patient when he needs to be," she said. "Yes. But you said he's running out of time." "He is. My timeline for the transitions I've been making is moving faster than he anticipated. Every month that passes is territory he can't reclaim." Marco's jaw tightened slightly. "He's making moves he wouldn't make if he had more runway. Which makes him more dangerous," she said, "not less." Yes. She thought about this. Thought about a man she had never met who had her phone number and knew where she worked and had decided she was a useful piece in something she had never agreed to participate in. She thought about 3 years of carrying Sal Conti's debt. About a lifetime of being the person that circumstances happened to, rather than the person who happened to circumstances. She looked at Marco DeLuca, this complicated, dark, carefully honest man who had walked into her life 6 weeks after calling her wasn't even the right word for it because he hadn't called her anything. He had simply seen her, and that had turned out to be enough to change everything. "What do you need from me?" she said. He shook his head slightly. "I don't need anything from you. I need you safe." "Those aren't mutually exclusive," she said. "Stop trying to protect me from a situation I'm already in and tell me what's useful. What does being useful look like from where you're sitting?" He studied her. "You keep your routine," he said. "You don't change anything that would signal to Reyes that you know he's watching. You go to work, you come home, you live your life as normally as possible." He paused. "And you don't meet with anyone who contacts you through unofficial channels without telling me first." "Agreed," she said. "And you let me put someone close to you, not visible, not intrusive, someone within range." She thought about that, about what it meant to accept that kind of presence. "Who?" she said. "A woman named Carla. She's worked with me for 6 years. She's good at being invisible." He said it with a faint irony that acknowledged the specific resonance of that phrase between them. "You won't know she's there most of the time." "But she'll be there." "Yes." Elena looked at her coffee, looked at her hands around it, looked at the small, worn, honest place they were sitting in, where nobody knew who either of them was, and the coffee was just coffee, and the chairs didn't match, and the counter had a crack that nobody had bothered to fix. "Okay," she said. He exhaled, just slightly, just enough for her to notice. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me. Fix it." She looked up at him. "Whatever you're planning with Reyes, fix it. Not for me. Because you were already planning to, and now you're going to do it faster." She paused. "But also for me. Because I didn't spend 3 years surviving Sal Conti to become someone else's leverage." Marco looked at her across the table. "No," he said quietly. "You didn't." She did not tell Adrian. She wanted to. The impulse was real. He was someone she trusted, someone with good judgment, someone who had already demonstrated he cared about her well-being in the specific way of a person who wanted nothing from it. But telling Adrian meant explaining the full scope of what she'd become involved in, and she understood enough about his business and his relationships to know that information like that carried its own weight. She kept the information and carried it alone the way she had always carried hard things. Carla turned out to be a woman in her late 30s, who appeared in Elena's life as a neighbor she'd somehow not noticed before moving into the apartment 2 doors down with a series of unremarkable boxes and a cat and a schedule that seemed to match Elena's own with a coincidence that was not coincidence. They nodded to each other in the hallway. They exchanged exactly the amount of small talk that neighbors exchange. Carla was quiet and observant, and had the particular quality of someone who saw everything and responded to none of it. Elena found her presence oddly comforting rather than intrusive. There was something grounding about knowing that an eye that was on her side was close by. The days passed. A week. Then 2. Nothing happened. No more phone calls. No contact from Reyes. The particular tension of waiting for a threat to materialize began to have its own exhausting quality, the way silence before a storm is sometimes harder to endure than the storm itself. Work continued. Adrienne's third-quarter planning required a client dinner for 40 people, which was the most complex event she'd managed yet, and the planning consumed her in the productive way that left no room for other thoughts during the hours she gave to it. She did the work. She did it well. She did not allow herself to be distracted by the category of things she was not thinking about while she was doing it. Adrien watched her manage the event with the same quiet attention he always gave to things he respected, and afterward, when the guests were gone and the space was being reset, he found her doing a final walkthrough. "Perfect," he said from the doorway. "The Henderson table was seated wrong," she said. "I noticed it during appetizers and fixed it, but it should have been right from the start." "Nobody noticed." "I noticed." He smiled. "That's why it works." He fell into step beside her as she finished the walkthrough. "Are you all right? You seem not quite here the last couple weeks." She kept her eyes on the room. "I'm here. I'm fine. Elena." He said her name the way he always did, without pressure, but with enough weight to indicate that the word after it was meant. "I'm not asking as your employer. I'm asking as someone who—" He stopped, reconsidered. "As a friend. If you're in something you need help with, I'd like you to know that's an option." She turned to look at him. Adrien Valenti was standing in the doorway of his own event space at 11 o'clock at night, tie-loosened jacket over one arm, looking at her with the specific expression of a man who had decided weeks ago to let something go and was finding it required more deciding than he'd anticipated. "I know," she said. "I know that's an option, and I appreciate it more than I'm probably showing." "You don't have to show it," he said. "Just know it's there." She nodded. He left. She stood in the empty room for a moment and felt the weight of kindness, which was sometimes heavier than difficulty, because it required something of you that difficulty didn't. Difficulty required survival. Kindness required trust. She was still learning to carry that. The twist came on a Thursday in broad daylight in the most unremarkable possible way. She was leaving the office at lunchtime, routine the same route she always took, visible, because Marco had said visibility was the strategy, when a woman fell into step beside her that she had never seen before. Not Carla. Not anyone she recognized. She was perhaps 45, well-dressed in a way that was deliberately understated. Dark hair cut short, walking with the precision of someone who moved through the world with a clear sense of where they were going. "Don't stop walking," the woman said quietly. "Don't react. Just listen." Elena kept walking, her heart rate adjusted without her permission. "My name is Sofia Reyes," the woman said. "Victor is my brother." Everything in Elena went very still. "I have been trying to get a message to Marco DeLuca for 3 weeks. The woman continued, her voice low and even. "Every channel I've tried has been shut down because Victor watches everything I do. You are the only path I've found that he isn't watching yet." "Why isn't he watching me?" Elena said carefully. "Because he thinks you're already handled. He told someone last week that you were scared and that you'd be moving away from DeLuca on your own." She paused. "He was wrong about that. You didn't react the way he expected, and now he's reassessing, but there's a window right now where he thinks the situation is resolved." Elena kept walking, kept her pace even, kept her face neutral. "What's the message?" she said. "Victor is planning something for the end of the month," Sofia said. "Not against you, against DeLuca directly. But it's going to involve people who have nothing to do with any of this business, partners of his people, in the transitional operations, legitimate people, who will get caught in something they don't deserve." She swallowed. "I don't agree with what my brother does. I haven't for a long time. But I'm also not someone who can stop him. What I can do is give DeLuca enough information to move those people out of the way before it happens. Why are you doing this? Elena said. Because there's a woman who works in one of DeLuca's buildings, Sophia said. In the legitimate side. She has 3 children. Victor knows she's a point of contact, and he's planning to use her as a pressure point. Her voice tightened. I know her. She has nothing to do with any of this. She's someone who needed a job and found one. A pause. I recognize that situation. Elena understood. What do you need from me? She said. Get this to DeLuca. Sophia pressed a small folded piece of paper into Elena's hand, without breaking stride, the gesture so practiced that anyone watching would have seen nothing. Names, dates, locations, enough for him to move his people before Victor makes his move. She slowed slightly. And tell him there's a condition. What condition? My brother doesn't know I came to you. When this is over, when DeLuca does whatever he's going to do, Victor survives it. I'm not asking for protection or a deal. I'm asking that you tell DeLuca that whatever he's planning, he leaves Victor able to walk away. That may not be something he can promise, Elena said. I know, Sophia said. Tell him anyway. She turned at the next corner. Don't look back at me. Finish your walk. Buy something at the coffee cart so it looks like that was always where you were going. She was gone. Elena walked to the coffee cart. She bought a coffee she did not drink. She stood on the corner for exactly 90 seconds, which was the amount of time she needed to confirm that her hands were steady enough to behave normally, and then she took out her phone and called Marco. I need to see you, she said when he answered. Right now, not tonight, now. He heard something in her voice. The cafe on Halsted, he said. 15 minutes. She was there in 12. She put the folded paper on the table between them without preamble, without setup, and watched his face as he read it. His expression did not change the trained stillness of a man who had learned to process shock internally rather than display it, but something around his eyes tightened in a way she was learning to read. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. Sophia Reyes, he said. You know her. I know of her. Victor keeps her separate from his Operation Protective, or possibly Strategic. I've never been certain which. He looked at Elena. She came to you directly. She said every other channel was being watched. Elena held his gaze. She has a condition. I heard it from your voice when you came in. Victor walks away. Marco said nothing for a moment. His jaw worked slightly. That's a significant ask, he said. I know, she knows. She's asking anyway. Elena paused. She did this because of a woman with 3 children who has nothing to do with any of it. That's the reason. Not for Victor, not even really for herself. Marco looked at the table for a moment. Not away from the conversation, just down the way people look when they're processing something that requires more space than a direct gaze allows. Tell me exactly what she looked like, he said. How she moved, what she said word for word. She told him. All of it in the order it happened, with the precise detail she'd been cataloging since the moment Sophia Reyes appeared beside her, because she had known immediately that every word would matter. When she finished, Marco was quiet for a long moment. You did everything right, he said. I did what made sense, she said. Don't patronize me with surprised approval. He almost smiled. That's fair. What are you going to do? Move people first. Tonight, before Reyes has any indication that I have this information. He paused. The woman Sophia mentioned, Diane. Her name is Diane. I'll have her and her family out of their current situation before morning. He looked at Elena. The rest I need to think about. Victor, she said. Victor, he confirmed. Sophia took a real risk, Elena said. She came to me because she was out of options, and she thought I was the only door that Reyes wasn't watching. If he finds out. He won't find out from anything I do, Marco said. I can promise her that much. Can you promise he walks away? Marco met her eyes. I can promise I'll try, he said. Honestly, that's the real version of what I can offer. She nodded. It was enough. It was the real version, and the real version was what she always asked for. "There's something else," Marco said. His voice changed slightly, not softer but differently weighted. "What? The fact that Sophia came to you means Reyes's assessment of you as handled is already outdated. The window Sophia mentioned is real, but it's short." He paused. "I need you to understand what that means." She understood what it meant. "He's going to know I'm not walking away," she said. "Yes, not immediately, but soon." He held her gaze. "I want to give you one more chance to step back, genuinely. Not because I want you to, but because I need you to make that choice with full information." "I have full information," she said. "I've had it since the night on the sidewalk when you told me you couldn't promise me safety, but you could promise me honesty." She paused. "I'm not walking away, Marco." He looked at her. For a moment, the managed quality dropped entirely, all of it. The stillness and the calculation and the careful directness, and what she saw underneath it was something that she had no language for yet, because she had never seen it on anyone's face before. Not directed at her. "Okay," he said. "Just that. Just okay with everything the word was carrying." So, 3 days later, Marco moved 14 people. She didn't know the details. He didn't give them, and she didn't ask because there were parts of how he operated that she had agreed to accept without full visibility, and this was one of them. What she knew was that Diane and her children were relocated, that several business partners were quietly extracted from positions that had made them visible, and that by Thursday evening, a significant portion of what Reyes had been planning to use had been quietly, efficiently removed from the board. She knew this because Marco called her Thursday night and said simply, "Everyone is safe." She closed her eyes. "And Reyes," she said. "Contained," he said. "Not finished. But without the resources he was counting on, he can't make the move he was planning." A pause. "Sophia's condition I've communicated through a back channel, that the information came from a source I won't identify, and that my response to it doesn't extend to him personally. Whether he figures out it was Sophia, I can't control that. But I've done what I can. Is that enough?" "It's what was possible," he said. "I told you the honest version." She sat with that for a moment. "You sound tired," she said. A pause. "I am." "When did you last sleep? What day is it?" "Thursday." "Tuesday," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Come here," she said. And then, because the words had come out before she planned them, and she was going to commit to them, rather than walk them back. "Come here and have dinner, not a restaurant. Here, I'll cook something and you can sit somewhere that isn't an office or a meeting or a strategy session." Silence. "Elena." "It's pasta," she said. "It's not a declaration of anything. Come eat pasta and sleep somewhere that isn't a chair." Another pause. Longer. "An hour," he said. "Fine." She hung up and looked at her kitchen and thought, this is either the most natural thing I've done in months or the most complicated. And then she decided it was both, and that both was something she could manage, and she put the water on. He arrived in 53 minutes, which told her he had not come from far away, which told her he had been closer to her building than she'd realized, which she added to the specific category of things about Marco DeLuca that she had decided to feel protected by rather than surveilled by. He looked for the first time since she'd known him like a man who was tired in a way he hadn't bothered to conceal before coming through a door. His jacket was off before she'd offered to take it. He sat at her small kitchen table, the one she'd had for years, the one with the ring stain from her mother's coffee cup that she had never been able to bring herself to sand away, and he sat in it the way a person sits in a place where they don't have to perform anything. She put food in front of him. He ate it. They talked about small things for a while. A book she'd been reading, a client of Adrian's, who had said something genuinely funny at the dinner earlier in the week, a neighborhood in the city that Marco remembered from when he was young, and that she had walked through once and found strange and lovely. It was the most ordinary conversation she'd had in months. It was the most ordinary she had felt in longer than that. At some point, the talking stopped, and the quiet that replaced it was not the kind that needed filling. She cleared the plates. He helped her, which she had not expected, moving around the small kitchen with the awareness of someone who was being careful not to take up more space than he'd been offered. "My mother had a kitchen like this," he said at one point, setting a dish in the drying rack. She looked at him. "Small," she said. "Real," he said. She understood the distinction. When the kitchen was clean, she sat back at the table and he sat across from her, and she studied him in the specific way she allowed herself to study him when she had time and sufficient light. The way his face worked when the management was down, which it was tonight. The lines of it. The tiredness. The thing underneath the tiredness that was not defeat. "What made you choose this?" she said. "Not the operation, I know that story. I mean the decision to change it, to move things toward legitimate. What made you decide to start?" He was quiet for a moment. "A man named Thomas Ortega," he said. "He worked for me for 11 years. Good man. Loyal in the real sense, not the transactional one. He had a son who wanted to be an engineer. I knew about the son because Thomas talked about him constantly the way proud fathers do, and I always told him I'd make sure the kid had opportunities." He stopped. "Thomas was killed 3 years ago because of a decision I made in the way I used to make decisions, in the transactional way. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time because I had made a calculation that didn't account for him specifically." Elena did not say anything. She let the silence be what it needed to be. "His son is now in his 2nd year of engineering school," Marco said. "I funded it, quietly through a structure he doesn't know is me." He paused. "It doesn't fix what happened. I know that. It's just the only direction from that point that wasn't worthless." She looked at him for a long time. "You've been carrying that," she said. "Yes." "Is Thomas the reason you moved toward legitimate?" "He's the reason I moved faster," Marco said. "There were other reasons, but he's the one I think about when the pace of it feels impossible." He met her eyes. "I told you the world taught me love makes you weak. That was my father's lesson. Thomas taught me a different one, that not caring about people is the actual weakness, because it makes you make decisions with only half the information." Elena thought about her mother, about a woman who had loved her daughter fiercely and protected her imperfectly, and left her with debts and strength in roughly equal measure. "We both got our real education from people we lost," she said. "Yes," he said. "We did." The quiet settled again. She did not ask him to leave. He did not offer to go. At some point, she moved to the small couch and he sat at the other end of it, and she picked up her book and he closed his eyes, and the city moved around them outside the window, the way it always did, loud and constant and indifferent, and inside the apartment, something very different was happening. Something quiet and real and chosen. She was still awake when his breathing changed, and she knew he was asleep. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought, "I did not plan for this. I did not plan for any of this. I was a waitress in a small restaurant learning to be invisible, and I was very good at it, and now I am sitting in my apartment watching a man sleep who carries a whole city inside him, and who has, in the space of a few months, made me feel more seen than 30 years of living in the world ever did." She thought, "This is not a safe thing." She thought, "I know that. I know exactly what it is." She turned back to her book. She did not retain a word of what she read for the next hour. Outside her window, somewhere in the city that never stopped moving, Victor Reyes was reassessing a situation that had not gone the way he planned. He was not a man who accepted that gracefully. And somewhere in the particular stillness of a mind that had been moving without rest for 72 hours, Marco DeLuca slept on her couch and did not know that the thing he had been trying to protect was also quietly, and without his management, or his strategy, or his careful honesty, beginning to protect him. She knew it, though. She knew it the way you know the things that happen before you have words for them, in the body, in the chest, in the specific place where recognition lives, before language arrives to name it. And when her phone buzzed at 2 a.m. with a message from an unknown number that said simply, "You made a mistake tonight." Now I know where you sleep. She did not scream. She did not wake Marco. She took a photograph of the message. She sent it to Carla. She put her phone down. She looked at the man sleeping on her couch, and she felt something clarify inside her. Not rage, not fear, but something harder and cleaner than both of those things. She thought, I am done being the person that circumstances happen to. She turned off the lamp, and in the dark she began to think. She had the photograph sent to Carla and a plan forming before Marco opened his eyes. That was the part that surprised her later. Not that she'd acted, but how quickly. 3 months ago, Elena Moretti would have sat with that message and felt the familiar compression of someone absorbing a threat alone, because alone was the only option available. She would have locked the extra lock, checked the window, and spent the night managing her fear into something small enough to function around. Instead, she had sent the photograph, pulled up the notes she'd been keeping in a document on her phone since the night Sofia Reyes had walked beside her names dates. Observations. The small details that accumulate when you are paying attention, and she had started organizing them into something useful. She was still at the kitchen table when Marco woke at 5:30. She heard him before she saw him, the specific quality of someone waking in an unfamiliar place, the brief recalibration. Then the couch shifted, and his footsteps were quiet and deliberate, and he appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at her with the eyes of someone who had not yet assembled his careful expression and was not entirely aware of that. He looked at the table, at her phone, at the document open on the screen, at her face. "What happened?" he said. Not a question. She handed him the phone. He read the message. She watched his face do something she had never seen it do before, not the tightening of calculation, not the managed stillness of a man absorbing information professionally. Something that moved through him faster than management and left a trace of it on the surface before he pulled it back. "When?" he said. 2:17 this morning. "You didn't wake me. I sent it to Carla. She confirmed the number was a burner, untraceable, already disposed of. She's certain of that. There was nothing actionable in the first hour that required waking you up." She paused. "You needed the sleep." He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she couldn't fully read. "You made a decision about what I needed," he said. "I made a decision about what the situation required," she corrected, which was information gathering, not reaction. Waking you at 2 in the morning to show you a message you couldn't act on immediately would have cost you 3 more hours of sleep for no tactical return. He set her phone down on the table. "You've been thinking about this in terms of tactics," he said. "I've been thinking about it clearly," she said, "which is what the situation requires and what fear prevents. I've decided not to be afraid." "Elena, I'm not saying I'm not scared," she interrupted. "I'm saying I've decided not to let it be the operating system." She met his eyes. "There's a difference. You know there's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I know. Good. Now sit down and tell me about Victor Reyes's pressure points, because I've been making notes for 2 hours and I have questions." He sat. She made coffee, the same coffee she always made, black and strong. No ceremony, and she put it in front of him and sat across from him and opened her notes. What followed was 2 hours of conversation that was unlike anything she had experienced. Not because of what was said exactly, but because of what it was. 2 people at a kitchen table in the early morning, working a problem together with all the particular focused energy of people who had stopped pretending this was something other than a shared situation. Marco talked. She listened and noted and asked the questions that arose from the notes, specific and direct, and he answered them with the same directness she had come to expect from him, without editing for her comfort, without assuming she couldn't handle the real version. Victor Reyes, it emerged, had 3 significant vulnerabilities that Marco had identified over the previous 18 months, but had not yet used. He had not used them because his approach had been gradual, the quiet, patient dismantling of operational capacity rather than direct confrontation. Direct confrontation was loud and unpredictable and left damage in places you hadn't planned for. The message on her phone had changed the calculation. "He's moved from pressure to threat," Marco said. "That's a line he didn't need to cross. It tells me the patience is gone. Which makes him more dangerous, she said. You said that about Reyes once before. Yes. He wrapped both hands around his mug. And it also makes him more exposed. Desperate people make moves that coherent people wouldn't make. Moves that can be anticipated because the logic is simpler. What's his logic now? Come at me through you, Marco said. Make me reactive. Reactive people make mistakes. So the counter logic is to not be reactive. To appear not to be reactive while actually moving very fast, he said. Yes. Elena looked at her notes. The 3 vulnerabilities, she said. Which one is fastest to use? He looked at her. You've been thinking about this for 2 hours, he said. What did you conclude? She pulled a page of notes toward her. The financial structure. The way his legitimate front businesses are layered. There are inconsistencies in the reporting that a specific kind of inquiry would expose. You've had that information for 8 months and you haven't moved on it because moving on it requires involving regulatory people, and regulatory involvement is visible, and visibility was counter to your approach. She looked up. But if visibility isn't the problem anymore, she said, then the financial structure is the fastest move. It doesn't require confrontation. It doesn't put anyone in physical danger. And it removes his ability to operate on a legitimate front, which is the part of his operation he actually protects. Marco looked at her across the table. How did you know about the financial structure? He said. You told me, she said, 6 weeks ago, at dinner. You were talking about how Reyes's operation differed from what you were trying to move toward. You said his legitimate side was constructed rather than real, that the paperwork was layered in a specific way to make scrutiny difficult, but not impossible. She paused. I remembered it. He was still looking at her. I wasn't briefing you, he said. I was having a conversation. I know, she said. I was listening. A long pause. I have people who are paid to listen to me in exactly that context, he said slowly. And none of them would have connected that conversation to this morning's problem in 2 hours at a kitchen table. They're paid to listen, she said. There's a difference between listening because it's your job and listening because you actually care what happens. The words came out before she'd planned them. She watched them land. Marco said nothing for a moment. The kitchen was very quiet. The city outside was beginning to wake. She could hear it. The first sounds of morning traffic, the sound of the building stirring. And inside the apartment, everything was exactly as still and real as it had been at 2 in the morning when she had looked at a threat on her phone and decided to think instead of fear. Elena, he said. Don't, she said, not unkindly. Don't make it about what I just said. We have a problem to solve. Make it about that. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he said, the financial structure is the right move. You're correct about that. I need to make a call. Make it, she said. He did. Tomid. The next 72 hours were the fastest of Elena's life. Not because things happened to her, though things did, but because she was inside the motion of it in a way that was entirely different from anything she'd experienced before. She was not the subject of the story. She was a person moving through it with agency, with information, with a clarity of purpose that she recognized from the very best moments of her work life, the moments when a complicated event was running and everything was moving, and she was the still point at the center of it, seeing the whole room at once. Marco worked through back channels she didn't have full visibility into and didn't ask for. What she knew was the shape of it. The financial inquiry that was quietly initiated, the specific documents that reached specific people. The sequence of events that was set in motion by a single phone call made at her kitchen table at 7 in the morning. What she did was run her own piece of it. Sofia Reyes had given her a door. She went through it. She called Sofia on the number Sofia had used to communicate through an intermediary, a path that required 3 steps to reach and was deliberately slow, and left a message that said simply, "It's happening now. He needs to know so he can prepare. Call me." Sofia called back in 4 hours. "He doesn't know yet," Sofia said. She sounded controlled, but there was something underneath it, a particular quality of someone managing their breathing deliberately. He will within the next 24 hours, Elena said. The financial structure is being exposed. Not destroyed yet exposed. There's still time for him to cooperate voluntarily, rather than be dismantled involuntarily. She paused. Sophia, I know Marco communicated about the condition you named. I need you to understand that the way this goes from here is partly a function of what Victor chooses. He won't choose cooperation, Sophia said. Not bitterly. Just accurately the way people speak about people they have known their entire lives and have no illusions about. I know, Elena said. But you need to know that it was offered. Whatever happens, it was offered. A long pause. Why are you doing this? Sophia said. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe my brother anything. I'm not doing it for Victor, Elena said. I'm doing it because you took a risk to protect people who had nothing to do with any of it, and that means something. And because... She stopped. Thought. Because I have spent a lot of my life being the person that other people's choices happen to. I decided to stop doing that. Helping you is part of what that looks like. Silence. You're different from what I expected, Sophia said. When Victor described you, he said you were a vulnerability, something soft that could be pressed. I know what he thought, Elena said. He was wrong. I can see that, Sophia said. And in her voice was something that was not quite respect, more like recognition. The way women sometimes recognize each other across situations that are otherwise completely different. Be safe, Elena said. You too, Sophia said. Victor Reyes found out about the financial inquiry on a Wednesday morning, and the hour that followed was one that Elena experienced entirely through a phone call from Marco, his voice precise and fast, updating her in real time, as information came through from people she would never meet. Reyes moved 3 assets. He made 2 calls that were intercepted by people who were waiting to intercept them. He contacted a lawyer who it turned out had a long-standing arrangement with people who were not Victor Reyes, and the information that lawyer then carried went somewhere useful immediately. He's contracting, Marco said. Everything is moving inward. He's going into a defensive position. Is that good? She said. It's better than the alternative, he said. Defensive means he's not coming at you. Defensive means he's protecting what he has left, rather than trying to take what he doesn't have. Does he still have enough to be dangerous? A pause. Honestly. Always honestly, she said. For approximately the next 72 hours, yes, Marco said. After that, probably not in any way that's directed at you. And during those 72 hours, Carla stays. You vary your routine. You don't go anywhere without telling me first. And you, she said. I'll be moving, he said. She understood what that meant. Marco, she said. I'll be fine, he said. That's not... She stopped. Restarted. That's not what I was going to say. I was going to say be careful, which I know you know, but I needed to say it. A pause. Longer than the tactical pauses. I know, he said. His voice was different from how it was when they discussed operational things. I'll be careful. She sat with her phone after the call ended and understood something she had been circling for weeks without landing on. She was afraid for him. Not in the way you're afraid for someone you've accidentally become involved with and don't want to be collateral damage to. In the specific personal clarifying way that meant the thing happening in her chest had a name and the name was not complicated. She sat with that understanding for approximately 45 seconds. Then she got up and went to work because Adrian had a client presentation in 2 hours and the materials still needed organizing, and she was a person who showed up. Adrian found her in the conference room at noon laying out presentation folders with the particular precision that had become her signature. And he sat down at the table without being invited in that specific Adrian way of occupying space that he'd been warmly permitted into. You look like you haven't slept, he said. I slept, she said, less than usual. Is it over? He said it carefully without specificity, in a way that confirmed he had been tracking the shape of things without being told the contents. She looked at him. Almost. He nodded. Good. Adrian, you don't have to explain anything to me, he said. I told you that before. I know. I want to explain something anyway. She set down the folder she was holding and looked at him directly. You asked me once if I was being careful. I said I was trying to be. I want to tell you that I was wrong not about the trying, but about what careful meant. I thought careful meant staying at the edge of things, keeping distance, not committing to anything I couldn't walk back from. She paused. That's not careful. That's just a slower way of being afraid. Adrian looked at her for a moment. What changed? He said. Someone sent me a threatening message at 2 a.m, she said. And instead of being scared, I got angry. And the anger was... She searched for the word. Clarifying. He was quiet for a moment. And Marco. She met his eyes. I know what you said. That first night I called her beautiful first. I heard it. It meant something. She paused. And I think you knew, even when you said it, what you were actually saying. He looked at the table for a moment. I was saying goodbye to something I didn't fully try for, he said quietly. Yes. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. He looked up. I'm not sorry I said it. Some things need to be named before you can let them go. He gave her the small, genuine, slightly rueful version of his easy smile. He's lucky. I want you to know I think that. I'll tell him, she said. Don't tell him that, Adrian said. He'll just agree with me, and that will be insufferable. She laughed. A real one, short and startled out of her. It was the first time she'd laughed in 4 days, and it felt like something releasing from a place she hadn't known was held. Adrian smiled, the full version, the easy, warm one. Go finish the folders, he said. We have a presentation in 2 hours. She went back to work. The call came at 9:17 that evening. Not Marco, not Carla, not Sophia. A number she didn't recognize, and she answered it this time with her hand steady and her voice even, and the specific clarity of someone who had decided. Miss Moretti. Victor Reyes's voice was low and controlled and sounded nothing like she had expected. She had built an image of him from fragments threat calculation. A man who spent people like currency, and the voice that arrived was something more ordinary than that. Tired almost. Like a man at the end of something speaking across it. Mr. Reyes, she said. A pause. He had not expected her to know his name. The pause told her that. You're not what I assessed you as, he said. I know, she said. You said I was soft, something that could be pressed. Another pause, longer. My sister, he said. I won't confirm or deny anything about how information moved, she said. What I'll tell you is that the person you should be angry at is the person who put an innocent woman with 3 children in a position where someone felt they had to act. Silence. You're calling me, she said, which means you've assessed that the current situation doesn't favor continuing. I want you to understand something. This call was predictable. I've been expecting it since yesterday morning. I didn't tell Marco about it in advance because I wanted to have it myself. She paused. Whatever you were planning to say it. I'm listening. Another silence. This one had a different quality. I want to speak with DeLuca, Reyes said. Call him, she said. He won't take the call from me. He will if I tell him to, she said. The words came out and sat in the space between them, and she felt the weight of what she had just said, not as arrogance, but as simple stated fact, and the fact of its accuracy was something she was still adjusting to. You have that kind of standing, Reyes said. Not a question. He was recalibrating. Make your case to me first, she said. Convince me it's worth his time. She stood in her apartment, and she listened to Victor Reyes, the man who had called her a vulnerability, who had sent a message at 2 a.m. to tell her she'd made a mistake, who had been moving against the person she cared about for 18 months. explain in a voice stripped of most of its threat what he wanted. He wanted the financial inquiry to stop before it became public. He was willing to dismantle the Eastern distribution operation himself, voluntarily, on a documented timeline with a third-party oversight structure. He was willing to leave the territories he'd been trying to absorb. He was willing, in short, to surrender the things he'd been trying to take in exchange for the preservation of what he already had, in a form he could control the transition of. Elena listened to all of it. "Why are you telling me this instead of going through proper channels?" she said when he finished. "Because the proper channels have already moved faster than I expected," he said. "And because I think you'll give me a real answer rather than a strategic one." She thought about that. "Victor walks away," she said. The condition Sophia had named. That was the thing that was asked for. "I know," he said. "I know what she did." His voice shifted just slightly, just for a moment. "She shouldn't have had to." "No," Elena agreed. "She shouldn't." "Will DeLuca hear me?" he said. Elena thought about Marco at her kitchen table, about the conversation they'd had about Thomas Ortega, and what it cost to make decisions without accounting for people, about a man who was trying slowly and imperfectly to move towards something better, and who understood better than almost anyone what the costs of not doing so looked like. "I'll tell him you called," she said. "I'll tell him what you offered. What he does with that is his decision." She paused. "But I'll tell him that you led with the Eastern operation first. Not the financial protection. The Eastern operation. And I'll tell him that means something about how serious you are." A long pause. "Thank you," Victor Reyes said. She ended the call. She stood in the silence for a moment. Then she called Marco. He arrived in 20 minutes. She told him everything, the call, the terms, the order in which Reyes had presented them. She told it in sequence with precision, without editorializing the way she'd learned to give him information, because precision was what he needed, and she'd become someone who gave people what they needed, rather than a softened version of it. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He led with the Eastern operation," Marco said. "Yes." "Not the financial inquiry." "I noted that specifically," she said. He processed this. She watched him work through it, the specific quality of someone running multiple calculations simultaneously, and she did not rush it because she had learned to give him the time his thinking required. "He's serious," Marco said finally. "That's what I thought," she said. "But it's your decision." He looked at her. "You could have told him yes or no on that call," he said. "He was asking you." "I know." "Why didn't you?" "Because it's not mine to decide," she said. "My role in this was to be the path the conversation traveled. Where it goes from here is yours." She held his gaze. "I'm not trying to run your operation, Marco. I'm trying to help you protect it." He looked at her for a long moment with that expression she'd seen at the kitchen table, the one that appeared when she surprised him. Except it was deeper now, more layered, carrying the weight of 3 days and a particular kind of trust that gets built in exactly the conditions they'd just been through. "I'll meet with him," Marco said. "Good." "Not directly. Through intermediaries first. Standard structure." "Of course. And I want his sister protected," he said, "regardless of how the meeting goes. Sophia took a risk that she didn't have to take, and the outcome of my negotiation with Victor doesn't change what she did." Elena felt something warm move through her chest. "I'll let her know," she said. "You have a way to reach her." "Yes." He looked at her. "Of course you do." "I've been managing this situation for 3 days," she said simply. "I kept my threads." He shook his head slightly. "Not in frustration. In the specific way of someone encountering something that exceeds their expectation in a direction they hadn't prepared for." "Sit down," she said. "I'll make coffee." "Elena?" "Sit," she said. "The operational part is finished for tonight. Sit down." He sat. She made coffee. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. the one with the ring stain from her mother's cup, and the city made its evening sounds around them, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the quiet was the kind that contains more than noise does. "I need to tell you something," Marco said finally. She waited. "When I got the message, the photo Carla forwarded from you at 2 in the morning, I was already awake. I'd been awake since I left here, sitting in a car 2 blocks from your building because I couldn't make myself go further away." He said it directly in the same voice he used for operational facts and personal admissions alike, because he had only ever had one voice with her. "I have a lot of experience managing people and situations from a distance. I don't have experience being afraid of a distance." She held his gaze. "I know," she said softly. "I'm telling you because I said I'd be honest with you." "I know that too," she said. "Marco." His name in her mouth had been changing since the first time she said it, finding its weight and its shape with each use. "I told you about my mother, about what it felt like to lose the person who made me feel most real." She paused. "I know what it means to be afraid of a distance. I'm afraid of it right now with you." The kitchen was very quiet. He looked at her with that face, the one without the management, the one she'd been seeing more of over the past months, the one that was just the man underneath the name. "I'm not good at this," he said. "Neither am I," she said. "I've been practicing invisibility for a decade. My relationship skills are limited." "Mine are possibly worse." "Probably," she agreed. The almost smile arrived. The full version, this time unhurried, real, reaching his eyes in a way that changed the whole structure of his face and made him look briefly, almost entirely, like the man he was trying to become. She had never seen that before. She felt it in her chest, like something taking root. "Stay," she said. It was not a large word. It was not said with drama or weight or the kind of significance that announces itself. It was said the way she said things, that she meant completely directly, without apology, with full knowledge of what it contained. He looked at her. "Are you certain?" he said. "I've been managing risk assessments for 3 days," she said. "I know what I'm assessing." "Elena." "I'm certain," she said. He didn't say anything else. He reached across the table and his hand covered hers, and this time he did not withdraw it. The city moved outside. The building settled around them. The night continued in the way nights continue, constant and ordinary, and full of things that only become significant in retrospect. And inside a small apartment with a kitchen table that bore her mother's ring stain, 2 people who had been learning each other in the particular accelerated way of shared difficulty sat with their hands together and understood that something that had been becoming for months had quietly and without announcement become. Three days after that, Marco met with Victor Reyes's intermediary. Elena was not present. She did not need to be. She had her information from Marco before the meeting and after it, and the after version came with a quality in his voice that was not quite relief, not yet, but something adjacent to it. The particular sound of a calculation that had come out correctly. The Eastern distribution operation would be dismantled on a 14-month timeline with independent oversight. The territories Reyes had been trying to absorb were released. The financial inquiry would be suspended, not dropped, held as insurance against non-compliance with the timeline. Victor Reyes would walk away. He would walk away smaller than he'd been, with less than he'd planned for. But he would walk away. Sofia Reyes called Elena 2 days later. "He told me," she said, "about the meeting." "Good," Elena said. "He didn't tell me how it happened. He doesn't know I know your name." A pause. "He's not happy, but he's not going to fight it. I think he's tired." She said it without pity and without satisfaction, just accurately. "Are you all right?" Elena asked. "I will be," Sofia said. I've been in the city too long. I'm thinking about somewhere with less history in it." "Fresh start," Elena said. "Something like that." A pause. "Thank you. For the condition. For making sure that was part of it." It was the right thing, Elena said. It usually isn't, Sophia said. That's what makes it worth noting when it is. She ended the call. Elena sat for a moment in the quiet of mid-afternoon in the office at Valenti Development that had become the place she felt most competently herself in a professional sense, and she thought about 2 cards on a nightstand and a fireproof box, and a debt that had been settled by a man who had no reason to settle it, and every reason in the world she hadn't understood yet. She thought about Adrian, who had called her beautiful first, and had been decent enough to let her go towards something that fit her better, and who had come to work that morning with his easy smile intact and a coffee for her that he'd left on her desk without comment. She thought about her mother's voice being careful is important, but being closed is death. And she thought about how long it had taken her to understand the full meaning of that. She thought about Marco De Luca, who had walked into a room and changed its temperature, and who had spent months proving through actions rather than words that the man underneath the name was the one worth knowing. She thought about herself, about a woman who had learned to be invisible, and then slowly, and then all at once had discovered that visibility was not the danger she'd been told it was. She pulled out her phone. She sent Marco a message. "It's over. Are you okay?" The response came in seconds. "Yes." "You?" She looked at the word. "Yes," she typed back. "Come for dinner tonight. I'll cook. What time? 7? And Marco." She paused, thumbs over the screen, and then she typed the thing she'd been not saying for weeks in the specific way you don't say things until you're ready to mean them fully. "I'm glad you walked through that door." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "I've been glad since the night I saw you trying to disappear," he wrote back. "I've spent every day since then making sure you couldn't." She read it twice. She put her phone in her pocket. She went back to work, and the afternoon moved around her ordinary and real and full of the specific texture of a life that was finally fully undeniably hers. He came at 7, not 6:58, not 7:03. 7 exactly, which she had noticed, was how Marco De Luca operated. Not early, because early implied anxiety, and not late, because late implied disregard. Exactly when he said he would be there, as if his relationship with time was simply another form of honesty. She opened the door, and he was standing in the hallway with his jacket over one arm and something in his face that was different from every previous version of him she had opened this door to. Not the managed stillness, not the careful directness, not even the unguarded version she'd been seeing more of over the past weeks. Something quieter than all of those. Something that had stopped performing even the honest version of itself and was simply present. "You cooked," he said, and she could tell from the way he said it that he could smell it from the hallway. "I said I would," she said, and stepped back to let him in. He set his jacket on the chair by the door, the one that had become his chair over the course of evenings she hadn't planned, and then stopped trying to plan, and he followed her into the kitchen and stood in the specific spot he'd found weeks ago that was close enough to talk to her while she worked, but far enough to not be in her way. She had noticed that spot. She had not said anything about it. "How do you feel?" he said. She thought about it honestly, like something ended, and like I don't know yet what the ending means for what comes after it. "That's an accurate description of endings," he said. "Helpful," she said, and handed him a wooden spoon. "Stir this. Don't let it stick." He stirred. They worked in the kitchen together, in the easy quiet they had developed without discussing it, and she thought about how strange it was that comfort could arrive in a form you hadn't recognized as comfortable until you were already inside it. "Victor's lawyer confirmed the timeline documentation today," Marco said after a few minutes. 14 months. Independent oversight structure in place by the end of next week." "You sound surprised," she said. "I'm cautiously not surprised," he said. "Which is different." "You expected him to try to renegotiate." "I expected him to try something. He's a man who tries things." He paused. "He didn't. I think he's genuinely done." Elena thought about the voice on the phone. Tired, she had thought. Like a man at the end of something. "He is," she said. Marco looked at her. "You know that from one phone call." I know that from the order he said things, she said. He led with the concession, not the ask. Men who are still fighting lead with what they want. Men who are finished lead with what they're offering. Silence. I need to ask you something, Marco said. She heard the shift in his voice, the note before the note. She set down what she was holding and turned to face him. Ask, she said. The past 3 months, he said. The way you operated during the Reyes situation. The call you made to Sophia. The call you took from Victor. The 2 hours of notes at your kitchen table at 3 in the morning. He held her gaze. You are not a woman who wandered into the periphery of my world. You are a woman who walked into the center of it and functioned there more effectively than people I have paid and trained for years. She waited. I need to know, he said, if that was circumstantial, something you did because you were already in it and had no choice, or if it's something you would choose, knowing what it costs. The question sat between them. She understood what he was actually asking. Not a tactical question, not an operational one. He was asking her whether she wanted the life that came with him. The whole of it, not the version she'd been eased into gradually, but the real one with its full weight, and its full complexity, and its full requirement of exactly the kind of person she now knew herself to be. My mother used to say that the things worth having always ask more of you than you plan to give, she said. She meant it as a warning. I always heard it as a description of how you know something matters. Marco was very still. This asks a great deal of you, he said. I know what it asks, she said. I've been inside it. I know the cost. She held his eyes. I'm choosing it. Present tense, eyes open. He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps, and his hands came up to hold her face, and he looked at her from a distance of 6 inches, with everything he had, all the things he managed, and the things he couldn't manage, and the man he was, and the man he was trying to become, and he said very quietly, I don't deserve this. I know, she said. I'm not doing it because you deserve it. I'm doing it because it's true. There's a difference. He kissed her, not dramatically, not with the weight of accumulated months collapsing into a single moment. Gently, with the specific care of someone who understood they were holding something real and did not want to be careless with it. The sauce behind her started to stick. She pulled back and grabbed the wooden spoon. He laughed. She had never heard him laugh before, a real one, full and unguarded, and the sound of it in her small kitchen was the most extraordinary thing she had heard in longer than she could account for. Stir, she said, and handed the spoon back to him. He stirred, still smiling. She went back to what she was doing, and neither of them said anything for a moment, and the kitchen held them both, without requiring anything from either of them, except presence. Nut. 6 months passed. Not quietly. Nothing in their life together was quiet exactly, because the nature of what Marco was doing required constant attention, and the nature of who Elena was meant she was incapable of attention that was less than full. But the 6 months had a quality of forward motion that was entirely different from the suspended, airless months before Reyes. They were building something. She could feel the structure of it taking shape. Marco's legitimate transition accelerated. She didn't orchestrate it. It was his work, his plan, the thing he had been moving toward before she arrived and would have continued toward without her. But she was present for it in a way that was increasingly substantive, and what she contributed was not operational in the way his people contributed. What she contributed was what she had always contributed, without knowing it had value. She read people. She saw rooms. She understood the difference between what a person said they wanted and what they would actually accept, and she could navigate that gap with a precision that surprised even her now that she had language for it. The Caldwell meeting, Marco said on a Tuesday evening, that had started as dinner and become a debrief, the way their evenings often did, blurring the edges between the personal and the work, in a way that might have bothered her once and now simply felt like the texture of a shared life. Walk me through what you saw. Caldwell wants the partnership, but he's afraid of the public association, she said. Not because of you specifically, because of the optics of his political ambitions. He's planning to run for city council in 18 months, and he's already calculating. He didn't say anything about political ambitions. He had a photo on his phone that he tilted away from you when you sat down, she said. A campaign strategy graphic. He minimized it quickly, but not before I saw the format. And every time you named a specific dollar figure, he did a calculation behind his eyes before he responded, not about the money, about how it would read in a disclosure filing. Marco looked at her. You got all of that from a 90-minute meeting, he said. I got all of that from the first 20 minutes, she said. The rest confirmed it. He leaned back. So the partnership structure needs to be restructured, something that gives him deniability in public filings while still giving us the access we need. And you need to give him a reason to trust the deniability is real, she said. Not just structural. He's going to need to believe that you won't surface the connection if it becomes inconvenient for you. Why would I surface it? You wouldn't. But he doesn't know you the way I do. She paused. Let me talk to him, not in a meeting informally. I'll frame it differently than you can. Marco looked at her for a long moment. You're proposing to become a formal part of this, he said. I've been an informal part of it for months, she said. I'm proposing we stop pretending it's informal. He was quiet. This is what I meant, he said, when I asked you if you were choosing it. I know, she said. I'm still choosing it. What would you want, he said. Practically, in terms of role structure, what it looks like. She had thought about this. Not a title, she said. Not a position. I don't want to be installed somewhere. I want to be the person you talk to before the meeting and the person you debrief with after. The person who reads what the other people in the room aren't saying. She met his eyes. I want to be your person, not a function. A person. Marco De Luca, who had spent his entire adult life operating in a world where people were resources, and resources had costs, and the most dangerous thing you could do was allow something to matter to you that someone else could reach. Looked at the woman sitting across from him, at a table that still bore her dead mother's coffee ring, and felt something move through him that he had no professional language for. You already are, he said. Adrian Valenti heard about the shift before Elena told him. The city had ways of circulating information, and the information that Elena Moretti had moved from peripheral figure in Marco De Luca's life to something significantly more central was the kind that moved with a particular speed. Adrian heard it from a business contact who had attended a De Luca event and noted her presence there with a specificity that told him the observation was not casual. He said nothing when she came to work the following Monday. He had learned over the months of knowing her that Elena would tell him what she needed to tell him when she was ready to tell it, and that pressing before that point was both ineffective and disrespectful of the way she managed her own information. He waited until Thursday. I need to talk to you about something, he said, and she looked up from the client proposal she was revising and saw in his face the particular quality of a man who had been waiting to say something and had arrived at the moment. I know what it is, she said. I figured you did. He sat down across from her. I'm not going to say don't do it. I'm not in a position to say that, and it's not my call anyway. He paused. But I am going to ask you one question, and I need the honest answer. You always get the honest answer, she said. Is it what you want? Not what makes sense given where you are. Not the path of least resistance. Not even love, which I believe is real. He held her eyes. Is it what Elena Moretti, who spent 3 years making herself invisible and a year learning what visibility costs, actually wants for her life? She did not answer immediately. She gave it the weight it deserved. Do you remember what you said to me, she said finally, at my second client event? When I redirected Henderson away from the contract dispute, I said you'd been watching people a long time, and I said most of my life, and you said it showed in the best way. She held his gaze. For the first time in my life, I am doing work that uses everything I am, not a fraction of it, all of it. The watching, the reading, the patience, the anger, the things my mother taught me, the things difficulty taught me, all of it. She paused. That is what I want. And Marco is where that work lives. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. Okay. What would you need from me to make the transition clean? Notice period, if any. What works for you? She stared at him. "You're letting me go without a fight." "You're not mine to fight for," he said. "I thought we established that." The small, genuine, slightly rueful smile arrived. "But I want you to know what you've built here is real. Whatever reference, whatever recommendation, whatever I can offer that's useful, you have it. Unconditionally." She felt the back of her throat tighten. "Adrian." "Don't get emotional," he said, standing up. "We have a client presentation in 4 hours, and I need you functional." She laughed, the startled, real kind, and he left the office, and she looked at the door for a moment and thought about a man who had called her beautiful first and had spent the months since then demonstrating in every small, consistent way that what he had seen in her was real. She was glad he had existed in her story. She was glad he had been exactly what he was. The conversation with Caldwell happened 3 weeks later at a function that Elena attended as herself, not as a +1, not as a representative of anything, simply as a person who was at the event, and ended up in a conversation with a man who was working hard to seem more relaxed than he was. She talked to him for 22 minutes. She did not mention Marco's name once. She talked about the city. About the way development projects that were genuinely invested in neighborhoods created returns that purely extractive projects couldn't generate. About the kind of partnerships that survived political transitions because they were built on something more durable than mutual advantage. Caldwell listened. She watched him calculating behind his eyes the way he always did. But this time the calculation was different. This time it was not defensive. It was interested. "You have a very clear sense of how these things work," he said. "I've spent time around people who are building things for the long term," she said. "It changes how you see the shorter games." "Who are you exactly?" he said. Not rudely, genuinely. "Someone with a good read on situations," she said, and smiled, and moved on to the next conversation. Marco called her at 10:30 that night. "Caldwell's lawyer called my lawyer," he said. "He wants to restart the partnership conversation with a modified structure. He'll want deniability in the disclosure language," she said. His lawyer used almost exactly that word. "I know." She could hear the smile in her own voice. "I told you to let me talk to him." "You did?" Marco said. "I'm appropriately impressed." "You're appropriately grateful," she corrected. "That too," he said. And in his voice was something she still had not fully gotten used to, warmth, uncomplicated, available. It surprised her every time. A man who had spent his life operating in cold spaces had found apparently that he was capable of warmth the way some people discover late that they are capable of music, not something they developed, but something that had been there and simply hadn't been asked for. She was the one who had asked. She would not stop being grateful for the fact that she had. The anniversary came on a Thursday. 1 year from the night at Piccola Roma. 1 year from the private event and the broken glasses, and 2 men who had said real things to her in the same room on the same night. 1 year from the moment that she had stood in her apartment and held 2 business cards and understood without having language for it, yet that her life had changed. Marco came to her apartment early 7, not 9, because they were past the stage of calculated timing, and he had something in his hand that was not flowers and was not jewelry, and was, she saw when she looked at it, a folded piece of paper. She took it. She unfolded it. It was a restaurant receipt from Piccola Roma dated exactly 1 year ago. The private event billing. She didn't know how he'd gotten it. She didn't ask, because she understood that Marco De Luca's ability to retrieve specific pieces of paper from specific places was not something that required explanation. At the bottom in his handwriting, precise, forward-leaning, the handwriting of a man who thought faster than he wrote, were 7 words. "The night I stopped being able to forget you." She looked at the paper for a moment. She looked at him. "You kept the date," she said. "I kept everything about that night," he said, "from the moment I walked in." "You saw me from across the room," she said. "You were already there when I—" She stopped. "You were watching before I even knew you were in the room." "Yes." "For how long?" "Long enough to know that the man talking to you was seeing something real," he said, "and long enough to know I was going to do something about it." She held the receipt. You paid Conti's debt before you'd spoken to me, she said. The realization arriving with a clarity that resequenced things she thought she'd understood. You'd already decided before the coffee shop. I'd decided before I walked up to you at the event, he said. The call to Conti was the next morning, but the decision was made watching you clean up broken glass with more composure than anyone at that table could have managed. She absorbed this. You fell in love with me in real time, she said. Right there in the room. He looked at her steadily. I recognize something. That's not quite the same thing. What's the difference? Falling is immediate. What happened? He paused. What happened was, I saw something I needed to understand. And every time I understood more, what was there deepened. He held her eyes. That's not falling. That's building. She looked at this man, the whole of him, the complexity, and the darkness, and the transformation in progress, and the honesty that ran through all of it like a structural beam, and she felt the full weight of the year between then and now. What she had been and what she had become, and what the distance between those two things had required. I was so invisible, she said. Not with grief. Just with the clarity of someone naming a fact about a place they used to live. I was so entirely invisible, and I was proud of it. I thought it was a skill. It was, he said. It just wasn't the right application of it. What's the right application? Knowing exactly who sees you, he said, and choosing who to let closer. She folded the receipt carefully. She put it in the pocket over her heart. Take me there, she said, to Piccola Roma, to where it started. They walked, not in a car, not with the driver who usually accompanied Marco in a way she'd long since stopped noticing. They walked through the city the way two people walk when they have enough history together that the destination is not the point. The night was cool and clear, and the city was doing its constant thing around them, loud, various, indifferent, in the specific way of a place that does not arrange itself around anyone's private significance. They passed the corner where the black SUV had pulled up beside her 1 year ago, and the driver had said Mr. DeLuca would like a word, and she had looked at Marco on the sidewalk and decided that the word was probably worth hearing. She looked at that corner as they passed it. That corner, she said. He looked. He knew which one. Yes. I was terrified, she said. I had my keys between my fingers. I know, he said. I saw. And you walked up anyway. I walked up because of it, he said, not in spite of it. He glanced at her. Frightened people who don't run are the most interesting people I've ever met. I wasn't not running because I was brave, she said. I was not running because I'd assessed that running wasn't the better option. I know, he said. That's why it was interesting. She took his hand. She did it without announcement, the way she did most things directly, without making a ceremony of it. She felt his fingers close around hers, and the solidity of that was something she had learned to take in fully, rather than hold at a cautious distance. They walked. She thought about Sophia Reyes, who had sent a postcard 6 weeks ago from Portland, Oregon, no return address, just a picture of the coast, and 2 words on the back, still walking. She had shown it to Marco, and he had looked at it for a moment, and said simply, good. She thought about Carla, who still lived 2 doors down, not as protection anymore, but because she had somewhere in the months of proximity become a person Elena actually liked. They had coffee on Tuesday mornings when their schedules allowed. Carla had a cat named Incident and strong opinions about the city's public transit, and had never once, in all the weeks they'd sat across from each other, referred to her former professional role. Elena respected this enormously. She thought about Adrian, who had texted her 2 weeks ago about a community space he was developing in the Bronx, the one he'd told her about at their first lunch, the one that had started as a business decision and become something he genuinely cared about, asking if she knew anyone connected to the DeLuca network of legitimate operations who might want to participate in the funding structure. She had made 3 introductions. 2 had converted. Adrian had sent a single-word response, witchcraft. She thought about her mother. She thought about a woman who had left books on her pillow and worked 2 jobs and died, apologizing for things that were not her fault, and who had told her that being careful was important, but being closed was death, and who had been correct about this. The way she had been correct about most things, in the fundamental way of people who have learned their truth through cost rather than theory. I think about her every day, Elena said. Marco knew who she meant. He had learned to follow her thought sequences the way you learn to follow the thread of a piece of music, not because someone annotated it, but because you've listened often enough to know where it goes. I know, he said. I think she would have liked you, Elena said. Which she would have hidden very well, because she would have also been extremely suspicious of you. Appropriately, Marco said. She would have watched you for about an hour, Elena said, and then she would have asked you something very specific about your intentions, and required an actual answer rather than a diplomatic one. And if I'd given her a diplomatic one, she would have asked again, Elena said. She was very patient about answers she wanted. It's hereditary, Marco said. She squeezed his hand. Piccola Roma appeared at the end of the block, small lit exactly as it had always been, which was part of what she loved about it. The city changed constantly around itself, but this place had stayed with its old wood smell and its menu that had not been significantly updated in a decade, and its tables that were slightly too close together in the way of places that were designed before personal space became a commercial consideration. They went in. Ray was not there. She had heard somewhere in the past year's movement of information that Ray had taken a manager position elsewhere. The person who seated them was young and efficient, and did not recognize her, which was entirely appropriate and correct, and a different kind of invisible from the one she used to practice. They sat at a table that was not the table from the private event. That room was in the back closed tonight, and she did not need to be in it. She simply needed to be here in this place with this person on this specific night. Order for me, she said. He raised an eyebrow. You know what I like, she said. Order for me. He ordered not elaborately, not to impress, but with the specific accuracy of someone who had paid attention for a year and remembered what he learned. Exactly what she would have ordered herself, and one thing she would not have ordered, but would she realized when it arrived, enjoy. How did you know about the gnocchi? She said. You mentioned once 6 months ago that you'd always ordered the pasta and never tried it, he said. I remembered. She looked at him. You retain everything, she said. Only the things that matter, he said. She ate the gnocchi. It was exceptional. She told him so. He said, I know, without smugness, just as a statement of correct information. They sat in the restaurant for 2 hours. They talked about many things and did not talk about work for most of it, and she noticed that they had become people who could do that. Have 2 hours of dinner conversation that was not operational, not strategic, not the debrief that their evenings sometimes became. They had become people who could simply be in a place together. That was not a small thing. She knew it was not a small thing because she had lived long enough in a version of herself that could not do it to know what it cost and what its absence looked like. When the check came, Marco set his card down, and she did not argue about it, because they had reached the stage of their understanding of each other where certain things did not require renegotiation every time. I want to tell you something, she said. He looked at her. A year ago, I was a person who had spent a decade learning to take up as little space as possible. I had a system for it. I was genuinely skilled at it. She held his gaze. I am not that person anymore. And it's not because of you, or not entirely. It's because of the year, the things that happened, and the things I discovered I was capable of, and the things I chose. She paused. But you are in the reason. You're part of how I know who I am now, because you were the first person to see it before I did. Marco said nothing for a moment. She watched him receive it, not deflect, not minimize, not redirect toward something more comfortable. Receive it the way she had learned to receive things from him, directly, fully, without pretending it was smaller than it was. The night I walked into that room, he said, I was not looking for anything. I want you to understand that. I was not lonely in a way I'd identified. I was not aware of a lack. He paused. I walked in, and I saw a woman trying to disappear into a room she was managing better than everyone in it, and something in me that had been very still for a very long time moved. He held her eyes. I didn't know what it was then. I know what it was now. What was it? She said. Recognition, he said. The specific kind that happens when you encounter something real after a long time in rooms full of things that are only performing realness. He leaned forward slightly. You were the first real thing I'd seen in years. I wasn't going to let that go. She held the weight of that. You changed, she said. In the year. Not because of me, I know you were already moving. But you've changed. Yes, he said simply. Is it what you wanted? He considered this with the honesty she had come to depend on. I wanted the operation to be cleaner, he said. I wanted to be able to look at what I'd built and find something in it worth having built. I wanted to become a man Thomas Ortega's son could know about someday without it being a source of shame. He paused. I didn't know I also wanted to be a man who came home to the same kitchen and the same table and the same person who hands me a wooden spoon and tells me to stir without explaining why. He met her eyes. I want that more than I knew it was possible to want something. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Then that's what you have, she said. They walked home through the same city that had held the whole year of them, the restaurant and the sidewalk and the coffee shop and her small apartment, and every conversation that had built one thing on top of another until the structure had become something neither of them could have designed alone. She thought about what Marco had said months ago at a dinner table, where she had asked him what made him choose to change. I've spent the last several years moving things, shifting. She understood that now in a way she hadn't then. Not as strategy. As the kind of work that is both internal and external simultaneously, the work of becoming which does not happen in a single decision or a single year, but in the accumulated weight of choices made with full awareness of what they cost and what they were building toward. She was doing that work too. They both were. That was, she thought, perhaps the most accurate way to describe what they were to each other. Two people doing the work of becoming in proximity with the specific benefit of someone who saw clearly and said true things. The apartment building appeared at the end of the block. She had lived here for 5 years. She had chosen it for its location and its price and its anonymity. She had never particularly loved it. She had simply inhabited it the way you inhabit the practical infrastructure of a life you are surviving rather than living. It looked different to her now. Not the building was the building, but her relationship to it. The fact of coming back to it had changed, and the change was not about Marco being there exactly though he was. It was about coming back to a life that had dimension, a life she had chosen rather than landed in. She unlocked the door. They went up. Later that night in the quiet of the apartment, after the city had subsided to its late-night register, and the lamp on the table made the only light, she sat on the couch, with her legs folded under her, and looked at the receipt Marco had given her, the one from a year ago, with 7 words in his forward-leaning handwriting. And she thought about the arc of the year with the particular clarity that arrives when you have enough distance from something to see its shape. She had been a woman who served people who never remembered her name. She had been a woman carrying 4 years of other people's debt and her mother's absence, and a father's silence, and the specific weight of being seen by no one as anything other than incidental. She had been a woman who had learned so thoroughly that she had believed it was a permanent truth that visibility was danger and invisibility was safety. And then a young man at a private event had said a true thing to her out loud, and a different man had walked through a door, and the life she had been surviving had slowly, and then all at once, become a life she was choosing. She put the receipt back in her pocket. Marco came back from the kitchen. He had been making the tea he made late at night, the same ritual she had come to know without having been told to learn it, and he set a cup down in front of her and sat beside her with his own. She looked at him. He looked at her. "What are you thinking?" he said. "That I want to tell this story someday," she said. "To someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been invisible long enough to believe that's permanent. What would you tell them? He said. She thought about it. The real version, not the summary, and not the version that made sense from a distance, but the thing she had actually learned in the specific texture of the year. That the person who saves you isn't always the one who rescues you from the obvious danger, she said. That sometimes the person who saves you is the one who refuses to let the world keep telling you that you're worth less than you are. She paused. And that being seen by the right person, fully seen in the real way, doesn't make you someone different. It shows you who you already were. Marco looked at her for a moment. That's the whole story, he said. Yes, she said. That's the whole story. She picked up her tea. Outside, the city continued its constant, indifferent, luminous motion, moving around the people inside it, the way it always had, the way it always would. Vast and unaware of the small, specific, irreversible thing that had happened inside one building, on one street, where a woman who had made herself invisible had finally fully deliberately taken up her space, and the man who had first refused to look away from her was still there. Not because she needed him to stay, because they had both chosen this, the kitchen and the table, and the honest words, and the work of becoming with everything they knew it cost, and everything they knew it gave, and neither of them had any intention of choosing differently. That was not the end of their story. It was the moment their story became real, and real things chosen with full knowledge and open eyes do not end. They endure.